This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.
draft minutes and the draft minutes of the committee for the 30th of September. And they're outlined on your pack at page 273. And I have the members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. And then, if that's so, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Any matters arising from the minutes?
No.
No matters arising. Thank you, members. And at this stage, I'll hand over to the chair who's just walked into the room.
Thank you, Graham. Members, just bear with us. Just the correspondence.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, thanks very much indeed, Robin. I appreciate the assistance this morning. Agenda item 7 then is correspondence. Members, can I refer members to page 279 where we have 15 items of correspondence. A summary note is included at page 280 to 282. Can I ask the clerk to speak to the correspondence?
Thanks, Chairperson. Again, everybody's in the spotlight, so that's good. So can I ask, Chairperson, if members are content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 280 with the following exceptions. The first being is item 7.2, which is at 283. This is a response from SIA on the examination appeals process. So the committee received some correspondence which is marked as restricted because it gives some personal details of a student by their parents. But the correspondence, they indicated quite a lot of concerns about the examination appeals process. And SIA has actually come back with actually quite a lot of answers. So I can ask Chairperson if the committee is content to note for now and then to forward this correspondence to the parents who raised that issue.
Right. Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed. Then the other one, other couple of ones I wanted to point out was item 7.7. This is at page 344. This is correspondence from Steve Aitken, MLA, about EU exit arrangements. It's understood that this correspondence was sent in error and was not endorsed by the Committee for Finance. You'll note it's signed as chairperson of the committee. Can I ask Chairperson if the committee are content to note?
Content to note, members? Agreed, yeah. Agreed.
Very good. Then at page 346, item 7.8, this is correspondence from the Education Authority Chairperson confirming attendance at the committee on the 14th of October to discuss issues relating to governance and SEN. I understand that the Chairperson will be accompanied by Dr. Andy McMorran. The committee wrote to the Clerk of the Assembly, the Chief Executive, about the availability of a suitable committee room for this briefing. The assumption being, well, my assumption actually had been that members would want to attend in person. However, following recent public health developments, both in Foyle and I'm guessing in Uri and Armagh, I don't expect members will be attending in person. I also understand that the witnesses would like to use Starleaf as well. So, Chair, can I ask members if that is the case and if the committee is therefore content to meet here next week in room 29 with some members and all witnesses being on Starleaf for this closed session?
Members content? Content. Agreed.
Very good.
Thanks, Lord.
And then moving on, and there are quite a bit of other bits of correspondence here, but at item 7.15, which is at page 443, this is correspondence from the Minister about the Coronavirus Act 2020 Temporary Modification of Education Duties, number 13. So we get these notices every now and then. The committee's role is really just to note them. We can't change them. But the notice appears to relate to children that have not tested positive for COVID, but have had to isolate owing to an outbreak at a school, and enables voluntary grammar and grant-maintained integrated schools to provide a free school meal alternative. So this is not a payment extension notice. This is not, you're not going to pay the parents free school meal money. It's some kind of alternative. I'm not clear how schools are to provide those alternatives, and it seems to be an enabling rather than a compelling power. So can I ask the Chair if the committee is content to write the DE and just seek clarity on the position for children on free school meals who cannot attend school owing to COVID?
Members agreed, yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Great stuff. So that was all I had, Chairperson. If members are content with the correspondence, is there anything else which jumps out the page at them? Now is time to indicate.
Members wish to raise any matters in relation to correspondence? No? Okay. That's us for correspondence then, Clark.
Yep.
Agenda item 8 is forward work programme. Can I refer members to meeting packs which include at page 452 a revised draft forward work programme, and ask the clerk to speak to this item?
So, Chairperson, hold on. This has gone a bit faster than expected and my tablet has given up. So just what I wanted to ask members about was, following the meeting last week, we'd moved the informal meetings to 9:30 on a Tuesday. So the first of those would be Tuesday, 13th of October at 9:30 with the Equality Coalition and Equality Commission. So can I ask, Chairperson, if members are indeed available to dial into that, probably on Microsoft Teams? I'm just conscious that members have a lot of other demands on their time, and does that time scale actually work for them?
Members content?
There's
Chair.
Karen? Karen Bolton?
I would be okay for this Tuesday, but I am not sure about every other Tuesday. And I suppose it's really at this stage as well. We know in terms of the level of business can change, just when we arrive. So it might prove an issue, but at the minute I would be okay, but I can't see it for working for every.
Okay.
Okay. Robbie?
I think occasionally it would work for me, but mostly it won't. I've prepped to do as work and so on Tuesday morning, so I would find myself having to then sort of look at the material of it and making a decision. So occasionally I could do that, but as a rule it would be difficult enough.
Okay. Any other members? Okay. The rationale for Tuesday at 9:30 is... Sorry, Justin, do you want to come in there? No?
What's the scheduling? Just to repeat, please, what the scheduling is.
Yeah, so the rationale is that obviously it's extremely challenging to get through every request to meet with the Education Committee informal meeting. Therefore, prior to the pandemic, we obviously would have met from time to time, not regularly, but informally with some groupings, and we had tried to schedule that for Tuesday at lunchtime because it's a time when people are at the assembly but may have some free time. But it was becoming pretty clear that because that was a free slot, that multiple other meetings were happening at that time. So we're proposing that Tuesday at 9:30 as a time when people may be at Parliament buildings, but Assembly business is not in session until 10:30. Might be a slot where we could schedule some meetings, certainly not on a regular basis, but...
That's cool to me, Chair. That's cool to me.
Yeah, okay. And specifically then, the clerk would appreciate members responding to their availability for next Tuesday the 13th at 9:30 a.m. with the Equality Coalition and Equality Commission on the equality impact of COVID on children and young people. And then Tuesday the 20th with Angel Eyes on similar issues, I presume, Clark?
Yeah, it is.
And Tuesday the 3rd of November for an informal meeting with special schools principals. Hopefully you can see as well, members, from the nature of those meetings that they are extremely pertinent, and that it is important that we do try to engage with people beyond the formal meetings as well. So if members have other days and times that they think would work better, then please forward them to us. But I think it's worth trying Tuesday at 9:30, and obviously we can make use of Starleaf if necessary for anyone if that's helpful as well. Any other?
I think, Chair, for all the reasons that you have outlined, I think it's at least worth a try at this stage.
Okay.
And I can't see any alternative to the approach. They are informal meetings, and for that reason, I would think it is probably worth trying to meet with.
Yep. Any other members?
Can I just ask, Chair, in it being an informal meeting, does the clerk keep a note of the meetings?
What will happen is, a brief note, and then the chairperson under chairperson's business will then talk about it at the next meeting. So for members who aren't there, and if there are any papers, we'll keep those for members.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, we need to be flexible. So some weeks we may need to revise that timing just to suit the stakeholder and the committee. So just build in a degree of flexibility.
Yeah, Justin, happy to be flexible. The thinking behind it is obviously that in scheduling diaries, people may want to try, and so far as possible, is keep that slot free and to have some degree of advanced notice that's when we may try to do those types of meetings. But as I say, happy to be flexible. Coordinating 9 MLA diaries if you don't have an advanced agreed day and time slot is obviously fairly challenging, but we'll go with that. Thank you, members. Okay, any other forward work programme issues, members? No. Okay, any other items in forward work programme, Clark?
No, just that the committee staff will therefore be in contact with you about your availability, and if members, if the answer is no, do just tell us, and as long as we get a couple of members coming along to those informal meetings, that's usually not so bad.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, prompt responses, members. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Do you want to go back to apologies and then Chair's biz, Chair?
Yeah, certainly.
And then we have the Minister at 10:30. So.
Okay. We'll go back then to apologies, members. Members aware of any apologies?
No, there's none.
No? Okay. Chairperson's business then at agenda item 4. 4.1 is the review of suspension and expulsion arrangements. Can I advise members that the Audit Office report on SEN makes reference to an ongoing review of suspension and expulsion arrangements by the department? Members will recall that Nikki had suggested that children with SEN were more likely to be expelled or to be subject to informal exclusion. Can I seek members' agreement to write to the Department of Education and seek details of the terms of reference and the timeline for the review of suspension and expulsion arrangements? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 4.2 is the review of the common funding scheme. Can I advise members that in Assembly written questions, the Minister has made reference to the review of the common funding scheme. This is the scheme under which schools receive vital finance. The committee had been due to receive a briefing on common funding scheme review before lockdown. Can I seek members' agreement to write to the Department of Education and seek details of the terms of reference and the timeline for the review of the common funding scheme? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. 4.3 then is the EA1 programme. Can I advise members in Assembly written questions the Minister has made reference to the EA1 programme. This is seemingly a major capital expenditure project which will bring together the salary payment processes for schools in Northern Ireland. Can I seek members' agreement to write to the Education Authority and seek details of the one programme? Agreed? Thank you. Okay. Have we discharged draft minutes in matters arising, Chair?
We have.
Yeah, okay.
Person.
Could I maybe just check then, again, thank Robin for deputising in the chair this morning, and if appropriate, Clerk, just get confirmation in terms of our publication and debate of the survey, or is that better at a later item?
Well, for the Chair's information, the committee has agreed to publish,
Okay.
but it agreed also to defer consideration of the of a debate just pending the publication and to see what the reaction is. I think it was their feeling.
Okay, well maybe I could return to that later on then under any other business. Should we proceed, Clark?
I think the Minister may be on the line, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay then, members.
So
That is
it's agenda item 2 we're back to.
okay, members. Then agenda item 2 is our Ministerial and Department of Education Authority oral briefing on school restart. And I refer members to your packs, which include a cover note from the clerk at page 53, the school workforce attendance survey for the 28th of September 2020 at page 69, restart related correspondence from the Department of Education, PHA and EA at page 72, committee and departmental correspondence relating to the Engage programme at page 95, Department correspondence on support for childcare settings at page 126. Committee correspondence relating to post-primary transfer in 2020-21 at page 129. Committee correspondence to SIA in respect of proposed revisions to the curriculum and assessment for 2020-21 at page 131. And D, guidance on school restart at page 136. Can I remind members that the Minister is scheduled to leave at noon, so every member will have approximately 7 minutes for questions and answer. Can I welcome then the Minister for Education, Mr. Peter Weir, MLA. Good man. Mr. James Hutchison, Restart Director, Department of Education.
Don't think he's there.
Tina Dempster, Head of Childcare Strategy Team, Department of Education. Mr. Dale Hanna, Director Acting, Operations and Estates, Education Authority. And Ms. Arlene Key, Assistant Director, Youth Services, Education Authority. Can I remind all witnesses that proceedings will be reported by Hansard, and by way of welcome, thank the Minister and your officials from the Department and the Education Authority for attending today. You're very welcome to the committee. Thank you for making yourself available and for the answers to queries that the committee has received in respect of school restart. Obviously, when the public health situation developed during the summer, we had hoped that the coronavirus pandemic would be under more control than recent health statistics suggest. That is obviously not the case, and there are challenging times ahead and important decisions to be made. Minister, can I invite you therefore to make an opening statement of perhaps 10 to 15 minutes on school restart and in schools and in other settings, followed by questions from the members. Thank you. Over to you, Minister.
Chair, just look, delighted to be here. We can't even sort of huddle together. There isn't a bit of heating in the building at the moment, so we're slightly at a loss. Just to clarify, Chair, I mean, I have opening statements on youth settings, on childcare, and on the broader educational restart. Do you want me to take like all three together, or do you want entirely in your hands in terms of what way you want to handle this in that regard?
Yeah, you have 10 to 15 minutes to cover all of those.
Okay, well, I'll go through each of the elements. I'll start in terms of the youth restart. I'll take it in the order of youth, childcare, and then the broader educational school situation. Obviously, in terms of youth services, as you indicated, with each of the sections, we have officials that are with us, and particularly, I suppose, in terms of youth restart, as you indicated, I'm joined by Arlene Key, who's the Assistant Director for Youth Services, who's leading on youth restart, and I suppose particularly of the three elements, probably been the one out which particularly, if you like, the lead organisation has been the Education Authority, more so than the department in that regard. So just to give you a little bit of background, not only on the plans for the phased restart of generic youth services, but also give you the sense of the vital and exemplary work that are undertaken by our youth services, both statutory and I think in voluntary sectors. And we sometimes, there's a danger always of forgetting about the great work the voluntary sector is doing in supporting our young people at this challenging time. Could I say, first of all, I'd like to put on record my thanks to Arlene and her team and the youth workers in both voluntary and statutory sectors for ensuring that services have remained available to our young people and for responding to their needs under what are incredibly challenging circumstances. Their efforts and dedication have ensured that the most vulnerable young people have continued to be supported throughout the pandemic, and I'm sure the committee would be one with me in thanking our youth workers. So the public focus, quite often by the media, has been on schools, and I think some of the external communications might have given the impression that the work of youth service during the early stage of the pandemic and more recently the plans for youth are a lower priority for me in my department, and that's absolutely not the case. It's symptomatic sometimes of the lack of awareness of the vital role that youth service plays within the wider education arena, and something I'm keen to address. Youth service were amongst the first to operationalise an impressive and speedy response in not only addressing the needs of the most vulnerable young people, including their physical and mental needs, but also ensuring that ongoing engagement with young people through Youth Online. This work is included, and I think was of a vital addition to the payments that were being made, the provision of food to those most in need through the Eat Well, Live Well programme, and the fact that there has been this tried and tested programme which was able to be deployed, I think was of great advantage to both the executive and society more widely. Providing alternatives to antisocial and risk-taking behaviour and providing opportunities for young people to discuss mental health. In response to the tensions which unfortunately inevitably rise during the summer period, I'd agreed also for EA to undertake, again with the permission of the executive, a further series of work, including individual and small group work, targeted dedicated work with at-risk young people that was informed by the PSNI, and there was a cross-sectoral working on that. EA have also delivered the usual planned intervention programmes through innovation means targeted at young people who are great at risk of becoming involved in sectarian activities, civil disorder or other crimes during the summer when there are normally heightened community tensions. And I think all of us could also appreciate in current circumstances that given a lot of the broader frustration that was out there through COVID, that there was always a danger that temperatures could boil over at a much easier rate. I also get permission for summer youth work activities that were delivered by the voluntary community, private and uniform organisation on a voluntary basis to take place until the end of September, as long as PHA guidance was followed. That was a sense of permissiveness. All those services have undoubtedly been a lifeline to many of our young people and kept them engaged and informed, not only impacting positively on their health and well-being, but their readiness and ability to engage in both non-formal and formal education settings as these reopen. Going forward, further initiatives such as Link and a programme to address non-attendance at schools are also being developed by EA Youth Services, and I suppose in terms of picking up on questions, Arlene can talk about those in detail later. It's also against this background, with my agreement, that EA is undertaking planning restart of generic youth services commencing in October on a phased basis. Working with key stakeholders, including young people, has enabled the EA to understand the challenges faced by the sector directly and respond accordingly. To ensure this is done as safely as possible, comprehensive specific youth sector guidance has been produced by EA, and again, if there's questions in that area, it's probably in the best position to pick that up, with ongoing advice and funding available to organisations to help them address the challenges they face. EA staff are also working on guidance to build resilience within the youth sector, living with COVID-19, and indeed, as part of the overall well-being programme, there is a portion of the budget that is set aside for EA dealing with the youth side, again, while the focus has principally been on schools. Of course, we can recognise that no guidance can cover every issue, and specific questions emerge. That's being addressed and the sector being informed accordingly. As with other bits of guidance, this is always going to be an evolving situation. In terms of funding, 4.4 million is made available to the sector by EA through 4 support funding schemes with focus on local youth restart, emotional health and well-being, and support for the regional restart membership and regional youth restart projects. In addition to the recognition of these additional costs incurred, the safe opening of youth services, my department has produced an allocation of just under 1.4 million to the EA in respect of the PPE equipment for the youth sector. Arlene, I think, will be able to add to that in response to any questions that you've got, and I know also we'll be happy to talk about. There's obviously been the issue in terms of the outdoor centres, which again we can probably best pick up in questions. If I can move on then briefly, because I want to cover all these points at the start in terms of the childcare sector. So the committee will be aware, I suppose, of the initial actions that were taken, largely speaking, on childcare support scheme. There were 2 schemes to date. The initial one for the period April to June, a total of 2.8 million has been paid out from the scheme. However, there's still a small number of queries ongoing, so the potential there will be some additional costs within that, particularly as there will be a few appeals going on. I think it's undoubtedly the case that there were some problems with that scheme, albeit that the focus of those was to provide a level of support principally to childcare settings which were closed effectively which was, if you call it a cheaper situation, but one that, largely speaking, was able to keep their head above water. So lessons were learned from that, and therefore the Childcare Recovery Programme for July and August, the latest update from the 10.5 million, so far we're not obviously at a finished position in terms of costs, but about 9.3 million of that has been allocated to date. And also the committee will have previously received a paper on the increase of a little bit of additional funding to childminders, which is part, I think, of that overall amount. At this stage, there's no further funding has been provided to the department for the period September to December. However, there's work ongoing between officials in the Department of Health and DE and childcare sector representatives, and I think the childcare group as a whole actually has been a very useful vehicle which has enabled various stakeholders to be put in place on it to try to scope out, I suppose, potentially what could be faced during that period. And we're continuing, obviously, to bid for funding from the executive. I suppose, again, there will be further tranches of money that will be made available through COVID funding, but that will be a wider decision for the executive, so we can't guarantee those. In relation to guidance and support for parents and providers, obviously with childcare being something which is, while we give a policy side to it, the provision in terms of a lot of the regulations are done by the Department of Health. So Department of Health has continued to update and publish guidance in line with public health advice. And again, the guidance itself is kept under continuous review. The reference group is continuing to meet to ensuring that information is available to parents and providers to inform that. And positive case studies and reflections from parents have been shared by the reference group's members on social media. However, despite some of this, we also know that there are childcare providers who've had to close in recent weeks following confirmed cases of COVID-19 and work will continue with our health colleagues in seeking advice out of PHA and issues from the childcare reference groups on the operational implications. In terms of childcare, I'll finish by making a brief comment on the executive childcare strategy, although some information has been already supplied to the committee in terms of the paper we received. And also I know that we've had, Chair, I know, wearing, if you like, a dual hat, we had very good engagement with the all-party group on early education and childcare to delve into some of these issues as well. There has been useful learning from the last few weeks, which will help share our plans for longer term when work on the strategy can recommence. And I suppose conscious that there's been a significant period that's passed since the continuation on the draft childcare strategy and taking on board some of the useful learning since March, I think discussions are underway, particularly I think it would be a very helpful thing to look at innovation labs with key stakeholders early in the new year. To some extent, the exact timing will probably be slightly determined by the wider sort of health position on it, but we hope to move on that as soon as possible when we get into the new year. Finally, just on the education restart in terms of schools. So the programme is now well established, was established to effectively manage and process to support the phased reopening of our schools. The reopening was led by medical and scientific advice and continues to do so to ensure that it's done in a manner and a timescale that was safe for pupils, staff and wider society. The pathway to recovery followed by the route outlined in the education sector of the executive approach decision-making document. The programme worked alongside a wide range of stakeholders to co-design a series of detailed measures and guidance to provide a flexible framework to engage a safe phased reopening to schools. I mean, it's undoubtedly been the case that where there's had to be a level of trade-off and could be criticised either way, is trying to ensure that we have as informed a guidance that is there, we consult as much as we can, while the other criticism is that things arrive late in the day. So it's a try to do a certain level of balance between the two. Following three re-strands, the education restart strand is considering all matters central to the restart of education, so it's schools and other settings, including preschool, nurseries, AOTAs, in a safe and effective manner. The DE restart strand, which considers all matters central to restarting the department, including an exit plan for the restart programme, and the lessons learned and preparedness strand, and considering that. So as part of the project, I suppose there were a number of priorities that were identified. some of these are overlapping with comments made before. So it's about physical protection, it's about well-being, special educational needs and vulnerable learners, the standards in learning, the new school day, which I suppose was the focus for most people, and obviously the issue of childcare. The Education Restart webpage is now active and provides guidance and information for education settings, parents and carers and children and young people. And to ensure that all users can access information available, the page also signposts information on partner websites such as EA and CCEA. Further to this programme, the programme has worked to develop a comprehensive communication plan and recognisable educational restart branding. So that's there to support schools. And the practitioners group in the TUS and sectoral body consultation group was set up in March and has regular meetings throughout. The publication of revised guidance is not the end of the process. So we're in constant sort of discussions. And obviously, to some extent, it's not simply what happens, broadly speaking, within education, but we will be subject in that broader sense to wider changes, sometimes where health will view things may differ from period to period. In terms of, obviously, the restart guidance, the new school day guidance was initially published on the 19th of June, and it always envisaged this would be subject to prevailing public medical health provision on it. It was then able to be updated in terms of a revised new school guidance on the 13th of August, and is indicated throughout, while as part of that then the aim has been and has been achieved where schools have been able to be brought back in full. Obviously, again, this is not simply a return to normal, and obviously there's a number of key elements within the new school day guidance, which particularly focus in on enhanced hygiene, cleaning methods, issues around social distancing, best spacing, protective bubbles. It's a strategic document. It was originally designed around a day one, but we're in an evolving situation. In terms of testing, officials have been liaising with DOH and PHA in relation to testing. The Department of Health and Social Care has rolled out a programme to provide COVID testing kits to all schools in England, and there's been extended arrangements to devolved administrations. That offers to every school, and there's a box containing 10 individual home testing kits. The idea is not that we do direct testing on site. I think that would place our schools at this stage, in terms of where we are with technology, in a difficult position. In terms of the future, the medium to longer term, the focus is still likely to switch from the impact of the disruption. First of all, I think we've got to assess the educational impact of loss of learning and develop, if you like, appropriate interventions. And with the launch of the support mechanism through the Engage programme, which has been funded by the department, that provides that. It is also the case, which I think we're just awaiting sort of final business case sign-off, that in addition to the interventions that have been planned anyway in terms of the step up on mental health and well-being, there's a specific funding of 5 million that will be part of a restart programme, which again will soon be able to announce that level of direct funding to schools.
That's
it's undoubtedly.
By the way, Minister, if you want to.
Okay, well look, I've literally got about 3 paragraphs to go,
Okay.
type of thing. I'll maybe see if there's so look, we'll continue to work. We'll continue to work that. I think, look, undoubtedly with this, there is always going to be a level of bumps along the road. So it's about trying to cope with where we are, trying to be where we can scope ahead to it, where we can be responsive and provide that information. But undoubtedly, not everything will go entirely smoothly. But I think we have seen a strong return to schools, and I think a particular strong buy-in. I would like to place on record again my thanks particularly to school leadership and to staff within schools, but also it's clear that there's been a strong buy-in and a desire to return to school has been shown particularly by parents and children. And I think the recognition of the importance of education and indeed childcare and youth settings have been acknowledged particularly by the department. And so to take one example, it was accepted by the executive that when particular measures were being put in place in the Northwest, that this was on the basis then of schools remaining open, childcare remaining open, and also that support for managed youth settings also to be supported, given the importance of youth settings. So, sorry, I appreciate I've gone a little bit over time, but as you appreciate with 3 subjects, there's quite a lot to cover. But we'll be happy, myself and the team here will be happy to answer the questions.
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Minister. And echo your acknowledgement of the role played by teachers, non-teaching staff, parents, pupils across Northern Ireland in getting our education system restarted. Obviously, key to school restart will be and control of the transmission of coronavirus in our schools, and therefore our community will be prompt and efficient response to symptomatic and COVID positive cases, isolation of those cases, contact tracing and testing. So can I ask how many teachers are have been and are COVID positive?
Chair, we're working indeed, I think there were meetings yesterday in relation with PHA. PHA would have any of the direct figures in relation to this. I think they're working with us so they can provide the figures to both ourselves and to the Education Committee in as accurate and a fair way as possible, because I think we don't want to be giving either inaccurate figures or misleading figures. PHA have that level. Now, what we do have, we know that in terms of the figures, because there are surveys of both children that are in school and teachers that are directly in school, and there has been within that, we've had a very strong response in terms of the number of children that have been in, and indeed the number of teachers have been in. Again, as part of this, because what we do know as well from PHA has been that where community transmission has taken place, it may well have had a knock-on effect in terms of schools where either a child has got it or a member of staff has got it. Largely speaking, I think PHA are confident that there has not been significant levels of transmission within schools.
Okay.
But for example, where you've had a teacher who has tested positive, it has sometimes been the case that from a social point of view, maybe some of the restrictions will then limit this further.
Okay.
It has then perhaps been, what has been vulnerable has been some of their colleagues who've then had to self-isolate as a result of that. But PHA are working on figures at present because we want to provide something that's very accurate.
Minister, you'll appreciate we've got a raft of questions to get through here, so
no, I understand.
We're going to have to keep answers concise. So do you know how many teachers have been and are COVID positive?
No, we'll get you the figures once PHA are in a position to release that in a meaningful.
Figures? Do you not need to know that
Well, no,
information?
look, what I told you, we're working with PHA. They're PHA figures in that regard. There is no point in releasing figures which may be inaccurate in their nature, and it's a situation where that is something which evolves every day.
I presume then you don't know either then how many P7 teachers are COVID positive. No.
Well,
okay.
From that point of view, frankly, if we're going to get you the figures, there's no point then trying to. If we're saying actually from a PHA point of view, we're working with them, so those can be presented in a very accurate manner and a useful manner to both the committee and more generally on it. We're not going to drill down into individual classes in that regard.
No, I appreciate that, and we'll look forward to receiving those. Part of the question is genuinely to ask if you have asked and if you know, and it's slightly concerning if you haven't.
Well, with respect on it, we are meeting in terms of the detail of that. We're meeting on a very regular basis, and indeed officials were meeting yesterday, for instance, as part of that with PHA and the Department of Health. So we will provide the figures in return. I'm not going to get into if we're not in a position to release the figures, we're not going to get into levels of then trying to drill down into detail.
Okay, so you don't know how many teachers, for example, have been or are self-isolating either then?
Well, again, that would be a sort of a variable piece, and there's the opportunities for substitute teachers to be on. That's where part of the funding is within that. Look, these numbers will vary from day to day, and indeed part of the disruption that had happened in a couple of schools was on the basis of the impact not on children but on teachers, so they took a day or two to be able to put in place. And indeed, there's been some schools where they've taken an action of either closing a form or closing a school, and sometimes that has been because there's been a day or two where they've taken to actually, particularly where it's hit on, for instance, say a school principal or a vice principal, where there's, if you like, been a break in the chain of leadership, and consequently they've had to put in place within that. But we've worked with those schools within that. But I'm not going to get into the figures until PHA are in a position to be able to provide those in an accurate way, rather than try to sort of deal with sort of detail which they have there.
So you won't know either then how many pupils have been in self-isolation either then?
Well, we know from the point of view of the levels of attendance that are there, which have varied between the normal process in terms of, because where pupils have been absent, normally sort of the overall pupil attendance on an annual basis, and I think part of the stuff in terms of entirely comparing like with like, up until now in previous years, those figures have been captured on an annual basis. I mean, around about 94-95%. The overall pupil attendance has varied between about, I think it was about 91.3% and 95.5%. We monitor those on a weekly basis. And similarly, I think the level of teachers that have been hitting around about 95%. And there's a normal element of teachers being missing on a normal basis in terms of other elements. So those are probably the most relevant figures within that.
Right. Okay.
And again, it's part of that, I suppose, is also to try to ensure that in terms of the latest advice that is there from PHA in terms of the people that should be self-isolating, that is, obviously schools will also have a certain level of flexibility as to what they do in particular circumstances, but there's clear guidance on who should be self-isolating when there are particular cases.
Okay, so close contacts with COVID positive cases, for example, are required to self-isolate for 14 days. That's 2 weeks of school being missed. So you don't know.
But in circumstances sorry, that's again just saying it will mean that those pupils will not be in school. But but in the same basis as during the spring term, where there were gaps within that because pupils were at school, then it's an onus on schools to ensure that they are providing remote learning for those children. So but I think everyone will accept, which is one of the reasons I think why all of us are of a view that the more that we can ensure that school is as regular and as normal as possible, remote learning is still never as good as being directly within the classroom itself. But close contacts are defined within the PHA guidance, which is out there with schools. So, barring some very unusual set of circumstances, we shouldn't really be in a position, for instance, where we're seeing whole schools close, unless it's for a day or two for the likes of a deep clean or to try to reorganise staff or something of that nature.
No, but we as of today, you're not even able to tell us to what extent school is being affected in terms of attendance.
Well, we can get you the figures in terms of what the overall school attendance are. Look, the point is, you can plot out a figure of the number of schools that on any one particular occasion or any over a period of time will in some way have impact. But that impact might be, here's one child who is off, or it could be, here's a whole form that is off. So it's about actually ensuring that the data that is able to be provided is done so in a meaningful manner. I suppose if you're looking at a global level on that, the variations in terms of patterns of attendance are probably the critical aspect as regards, and those have been relatively close. They've been a little bit below what the normal figures are likely to be, although we can't make a complete like-for-like comparison, but it shows that the vast majority of schools, the vast majority of children are still in. One would anticipate that even under normal circumstances, you would probably have a higher level of absentee rate or absence during an autumn term than necessarily you would have during the summer.
We need to move on, Minister, but you can't have expected that you were going to come to the Education Committee today and the Education Committee wasn't going to ask you for a detailed brief on the nature of school attendance or school absence or the COVID positive rate of pupils in school.
The committee is entitled, obviously, to ask anything it wants in relation to that. Okay. But what I think we have an onus on working with PHA, because the PHA will have the figures as regards that, is to ensure then that whenever figures are supplied, they are absolutely accurate. They are something which are of value to both the committee and to others as well. And I think that.
Okay. Are you content with the level of assistance that schools are getting to do quite significant scales of contact tracing as a result of COVID positive and symptomatic cases?
Sorry, the point is that the process is that where somebody is tested positive, it is then the school has got to then draw up a list of those who have been in close contact. Close contact is very clearly defined within that now.
I don't need a detailed breakdown of how to do
and
it.
then they
I
will
understand
pass
how
that,
to
and
do
then
it.
they
I
will
wanna
pass
know,
that
are you
on.
content with the assistance that schools are getting to do it?
Well, with respect, the idea is that schools themselves will be able to determine who a close contact is. It is their role then to pass that on to PHA, and for PHA then to do the contract tracing themselves. It's not
it themselves. Schools are having to do this themselves, Minister. They're conducting contact tracing, and are you content that with the scale of workload that's required?
Their aim is to draw up the contract tracing list. In terms of the testing side of things, that's with PHA, and I think there's a delineation of roles that are there.
Okay, all right, let's move on. But quickly, in terms of clinically vulnerable children and children with clinically vulnerable members at home, the clinically vulnerable children, school restart guidance stated that they would get assistance from a health professional with regards to whether it was suitable for them to return to school. Do you know how many children are in this category? Are they largely at special schools? What percentage of them are awaiting assessment? What support are they getting if they can't attend school? So are these clinically vulnerable children getting the health assistance they need to either be at school or to receive assistance at home?
Well, look, we're working with health in that deal, do you think?
Chair, I think the only figure I can give you around that are those children who require aerosol generating procedures. So this week there's still 18 pupils that we're still working on trying to get into school. The vast majority of those are in special education schools, and the figure last week was 23, so we're working our way through it and it's coming down. But I don't have a figure for the other medical conditions.
And the position, broadly speaking, as regards special schools is that while, and it is the normal situation, very understandably, that school attendance at special schools would tend to be overall at a bit of a lower level than would be within mainstream schools. Again, I think it's running at around about 2% below what it would normally be on that side of things.
Okay, and in terms of children that have a clinically vulnerable family member at home who were to have a risk assessment in order to return to school, it's my understanding that health is not required to assist with that risk assessment. How has that situation worked out?
Well, look, we'll be working with health to try to do, if there's any outstanding issues, resolve those.
Right, okay. In terms of post-primary transfer, Minister, do you accept that there's been fairly widespread rejection of your January rescheduling of transfer tests?
I'm not quite sure where this fits into restart in that regard, but if you want to ride that hobby horse, happy to do so. Look, the reality is there's a balance to be struck. First of all, it is not in terms of dates. I want to make this absolutely clear, and you're very well aware of this, I'm sure. The dates are set by the transfer test providers. They are not an issue directly for the department. Our role is to ensure that whenever transfer in whatever form, and this applies both to those who are taking the test and those that are not, is that from that point then we are able to process, working alongside our colleagues within EA, to ensure then that can happen in a timely manner, which can ensure then everybody is in place for their new school, for the new school term.
I'm happy for you to say if you disagree with the question that I'm asking, rather than give a long answer. But I'm obviously going to ask the questions. It's my understanding that you had drafted a ministerial direction for EA to change their timetable around post-primary transfer administration. So I find it hard how having no role in this process stacks up with that.
Our role, as you know from the court case, we indicated we explored with EA whether, first of all, what timetables were doable in that regard, because there's no point, while the choice ultimately is for the test providers, there's no point in any timetable being provided which simply cannot be processed. It became clear from that we were in a position that tests could either happen on a timescale before Christmas or shortly after Christmas as a result of that. Now, the key role, irrespective of anything, is to ensure that we can ensure that every child is processed, that appeals are able to take place as well, so that they can happen, so that we are not left in the academic year with people being, and that That is right thing.
Okay.
The choice in terms of the dates,
The
and the reality is whatever dates are there, it is incumbent on us and the EA to ensure that there is delivery of that.
Understand. Okay. Okay. And so the process is going to have to be 9 weeks faster than normal. What is the additional cost for that 9 weeks shorter timescale?
Well, no, actually, I don't. I think you're inaccurate in terms of your figures. I think it's actually about a 6-week period in relation to that.
Thanks for the correction.
And 6 weeks, and of that, where they think, and there will be some changes which are going to be happening anyway in EA in terms of the digitalisation of the process,
okay, so
which
no
will be
cost.
there. Of that time frame, I think from that there are effectively the change from an EA, call it wider educational point of view, is effectively 5 weeks, because in terms of turnaround from the test providers, which without this happening, I think timeframes would not have been able to be met, is on the basis of them actually taking a shorter period of time for the processing of the tests themselves.
Okay. So no additional cost to the public purse for this?
There will be. There will be some level of additional cost in trying to make sure that things move more rapidly. Some of those things were things that were going to be happening anyway in relation to that.
Okay.
But to be honest on it, the more that we can make this, the more that we can make this a process to which things move as quickly and as seamlessly as possible, I think that's in everyone's interest.
Okay.
And that is true, to be perfectly honest. Whether you're doing the test, whether you're not doing the test, the important thing is to actually move P7 pupils on to Year 8 in as seamless a way as possible.
Okay, and schools who have decided to not use academic selection in their admissions process, do you believe that's a significant change?
We are finalising advice, having taken some legal advice in relation to that. So I think that the information on that, I think, will be made clear to those schools fairly shortly in that regard. And I think there's, so that will become clear. But because we've taken a level of legal advice, I think the schools themselves should be informed of the situation before there's any other action taken.
When did you receive the legal advice?
Well, we've got that. There was certain actions then that we have had to take on foot of the legal advice, which we're just finalising. So I would anticipate that we would probably be in a position to be able to clarify the situation with the schools probably within the next week or so.
So within the next week, you will be telling the schools whether or not you think that's a significant change?
Yes, that would be the intention. And that is, we're working through the final elements of that at present on it, but as I said, as it's on the foot of legal advice, and I think as there's maybe been a couple of cases where the issue is a little bit greyer than others, we're having to work through those, but we'd be in a position, I think, within that chair to be able to give that information within the next week or so.
I think if you deem it to be a significant change, then there are obviously a string of extremely serious questions to answer that we would wish to return to further to publication of that legal advice, but I won't go down that road today.
Well, from that point of view, it's obviously hypothetical at this stage, so we'll see what transpires there.
Okay, can I bring in Karen Mullen, Deputy Chair?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, Dale, Arlene and Tina for attending this morning. I have first of all, I have two questions in relation to the youth service, so I'll put them together. And I also want to commend the excellent ongoing work through the youth service at the Education Authority and our community and voluntary sector provision. The first one is, Minister, you give an outline and update there in relation to generic youth services on a phase-based approach in October in terms to reopening. In relation to Derry and Strabane and the new restrictions, will that be the same for Derry and Strabane?
Sorry, no, maybe you want to get the other question out first.
Yeah, the other one's just a wee quick one. We had correspondence in from the Uniform Youth Work Hub. They are unclear in relation to guidance and are asking for clarity around educational visits. Have they been paused to outdoor and residential settings?
Okay, let me deal with the two aspects. I think that the situation in Derry and Strabane may not be absolutely identical, but should be similar. I made very clear that youth services, whenever we were just, don't want to breach too much directly of, but I think it was accepted by everybody on the executive that when we were looking at the protections that had to be put in place and the, call it exemptions from restrictions that were there, going to be there in education and childcare, this should also cover managed youth settings within Derry and Strabane, because I think it's also the case that that it's not just, if you like, a localised issue there. You know, what happens in the first instance may well be replicated in other locations. And I think everybody within the executive accepted the importance of youth settings. So the position, I think, in terms of the guidance is that managed youth settings, I think, would be called. I think that can cover, broadly speaking, a fairly generic definition of that, are within those things that are. So from that point of view, I don't believe there should be any major difference. Specifically as regards the outdoor centres and the educational visits, we had worked out, I think, initially the suggestion was that these would resume from January. I felt that was too far away, and so I've given indications to EA that those should resume by the end of October. That is subject, the only thing that was particularly subject to will be, which we're still awaiting a final verdict from PHA and DOH. I think the other factor that members should be aware of, we are keen to get those resumed. The Association of Education Centres, or the exact acronym? Oh, sorry, yeah, that operate in the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. They are looking at an overall suggestion towards January, but we would like to see that resume here at an earlier stage. But that will be dependent upon getting a green light from, and to do so at the end of October. Green light from getting from PHA, Health and Chief Medical Officer. I don't know if Arlene has anything you want to add just in relation to that?
That's a good summary. Karen, in terms of the youth providers in Derry and Strabane, we met at 6 o'clock on the evening that the new restrictions were put in place to scenario build, problem solve, give guidance and advice. And the voluntary and community sector are very clear that they want to support vulnerable children and young people. They want to meet the needs of those young people, and we have very good processes in place of ongoing support, scenario planning, to enable that sector to progress. The same stands for our own statutory services. So we are standing up services this week, and we are ensuring that our young people are protected. There were 2 key things that were important to take on board. One, parents felt that in Derry and Strabane, some of the community sector and some of the council provision was closed, so why should youth service be open? And there was a bit of a concern around the visibility of that, and we have addressed that now, and we are, we've provided a pack for parents so that they understand that children are safe, that we are about, as the Minister says, education and ensuring that personal social development and our programmes are central to that work. So I feel that we've both got the provision in place to ensure there's ongoing guidance and advice, and that we are ensuring that young people are provided for in your area.
We're conscious that youth services cannot simply be a forgotten element or seen as a sort of something just to the side, you know, in relation to the provisions that are made.
Of course, Minister, and it's good to see that you brought Arlene along today, because I think the sector has been failing for a long time, and it was rectified a while back. Maybe just that a lot of the planning was going into the schools, and rightly so at the time. So there's been great work done by Arlene and her team, and it's, you know, it is, young people have missed out on so much, so it's good to hear it's been managed in a safe way, and we can try and provide services as if to do so. So thank you both for that update. Minister, I suppose Chris, the Chair, has covered quite a bit, but I just want to go back on some of the stuff. This is all quite moving very fast, and particularly I've touched on Derry and Strabane. And at the same time, we're continuing to see sporadic school closures and the withdrawal of class bubbles, and more pupils self-isolating. We talked there, Chris had asked about the figures, and it's difficult for us to sort of see the level when, but the recent update that's been provided is the 14th of September from your department in terms of attendance. My own daughter, who is in year 12, is off for the third time now, isolating for 14 days. She is a pupil, Minister, who has had 100% attendance throughout her whole school life, and you can imagine how worried and concerned we are, and this has been replicated right across. So again, it's around particularly very concerned around the prospect of the GCSEs and the A-levels for next year, and the uncertainty that that's going to bring. Minister, we are now in our second month. What work is ongoing in relation to remote learning and ensuring that there is a level playing field for young people? And you know that I've been raising this from March in relation to being connected, and there's been great work done by the department. But yesterday I've been told that one of our local post-primary schools has submitted their request for laptops and they're still waiting 2 weeks. So that means that some children are at home isolating without access to learning. We need contingency planning ramped up in this regard, and for your department must ensure that equality of access to the curriculum for all young people. So there's 2 parts to that. I already answered the first part, sorry. The second part is, will you look at widening the criteria to the IT equipment support from the criteria that's there at the minute, because we do have many parents who are still on furlough, incomes reduced, and more parents will become maybe losing jobs or less income coming on the house. We have already seen that, and particularly in my own area. So sorry about that long-winded, but hopefully.
Okay, well, there have been considerable amount of devices that have been, but look, if there's a specific problem at a school, Karen, if you want to notify us, we'll chase that up. We're also, I think, in discussions actually this week via some contacts we've had, which can hopefully widen the pool of devices. But again, there'll be discussions in the next few days in relation to that. Look, you're right in terms of the broader issue about trying to ensure then that, particularly for I suppose it's appropriate we're dealing with the challenges of technology here at this point on that side of things. No, I think there's a couple of issues in relation to that as well. So there's the issue of remote devices, which we're looking to see if we can widen the scope of. I think as part of that as well, there's also been an additional, I think, business case put in to see with DOF to see if some capital can be shifted further into digital devices as well in connection with that. It is also the point that I think one of the challenges where I think we've had to drill down a bit with schools and in terms of the PHA advice has been, understandably, there's also been a reaction where sometimes schools have seen a case to throw the net very wide in terms of those who are self-isolating, whereas the advice should be sometimes should be a little bit more limited, if you like, the number of children that are, and I suppose we're working with schools in relation to that and hopefully drawing that back in as well. But look, there's no doubt that there will be a level of disruption, and I suppose we're trying to ensure then that there are, that level of support where we can manage it. But I mean, it will be, you're right, it will be bumpy. I appreciate the position that your daughter is in, and that will also mean, I think, that whenever decision will be taken around, which again be finalised in the next few days on some of the issues around, particularly the GCSE and A-level side, but there's a level of scope that's put in place that we can't expect, or at least it's not unreasonable for the most part to expect the level of content which would be covered in a normal year to necessarily be reflected.
Taking far too long here in answers.
Okay.
Karen, you content there?
Just one last one, Chair, if you don't mind.
It needs to be very brief. Before you do, Minister, how many laptops have been given out? And if you don't know the answer, that's fine, just say it. But I think that's what Karen was trying to get at.
I think because I think there was a question, a question that Karen had put in, talked about that there'd been, I think off the top of my head, I think around about 6,700. Oh, sorry, Dale apparently has.
So, look, what I have some information here in front of me. What I can say is, in total for stage 3, we have 7,500 devices have been allocated across the system.
When you say allocated, does that mean given the schools?
I think the figures in terms of it being directly distributed was somewhere in the region of about 6,700. I can't remember the exact figure, but I know that yesterday, because I think Karen had put in a fairly similar written question and was signed off on yesterday. So I think there was, those that have been obtained, those have been allocated. There's a small gap between the two, but I'd say about 90% roughly have been. But again, we're looking to see.
In danger of being way over time. Karen, a very brief supplementary, please.
And just really, I suppose maybe I've gathered it from the answers that we've been given so far, and I have touched on the situation in Derry and Strabane, and it's just really to find out, Minister, what extra support that your department is given in Derry and Strabane, the local school leaders, to be able to deal with the restrictions and high levels of people off and isolating.
Well, I mean, don't forget, it'll have to be across the board, because where we are within that area will be to some extent a little bit of a variation of what's happening in other areas. Other areas will come up in relation to, so there will be there is, I suppose, more general support. Don't forget, it's also the case that in terms of schools themselves are to remain open, and that's it. And that's something which I think, to be fair, is probably fairly generic across all jurisdictions. If you look south, you look east, you'll find the sort of similar position.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Robin Newton, MLA.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank the Minister for coming to the committee. And can I also thank you, Minister, for you reacting positively from requests from boards of governors and indeed principals to visit schools in East Belfast. That's greatly appreciated, I know, by those principals and the boards of governors. I do want to say thank you. I think we should place on record from all members of the committee our thanks to the principals and indeed all the principal staff working in partnership with parents and indeed enabling the successful return to schools. From a personal note, I certainly do want to echo your words, Minister, on the work of the youth services. I applaud the work that they have done over this very difficult situation. But Minister, I have had discussions with principals and vice principals, and those have been around the increasing amount of work that the principals or vice principals or senior staff are having to do with those children who have missed out on the protective environment of a school over the period of the lockdown and the return. Can I ask about the relationship, or a developing or emerging or an additional relationship indeed that I would believe is necessary to support the principals in addressing the difficult situation of some young children, and indeed, is there an emerging or developing relationship with health in addressing the needs of those children, Minister?
Well, I suppose broadly speaking, in terms of addressing needs, we've had, if you like, the two interventions, one of which is now rolled out, the other will soon be there. The specific in terms of academic needs, obviously to the Engage programme, which is about 11.2 million, that followed on from smaller initiatives over the summer. But obviously the big concerns out there, and I've also met, as well as meeting at times with principals, also met with some groups, for example, Elective Action Mental Health, and in terms of some specific needs, also earlier this week with, for example, Guide Dogs for the Blind. So there's a range of specific groups within that. We're looking, I think, fairly shortly, I think we just got to get the final business case signed off of that £5 million recovery programme on mental health and wellbeing, which I think impacts in very considerably on some of the needs that have been there within that. There's obviously a role for health as well. That will also work alongside a range of initiatives that are being considered in terms of the wider mental health and wellbeing framework, which would be something that will be mainstream to a number of years on. We're keen to work with individuals. I know, I think relatively soon, Robin, specifically as regards East Belfast, I know I'll be meeting, I think, with a group of principals there relatively shortly. I know it's down in the diary, that as well.
I was thinking, Chairman, Minister, in terms of the family intervention teams and the relationship between the schools and the family intervention teams, where the indication given to me by the principals is that finding more and more that they need to spend time on these issues and seeking a greater involvement, a stronger involvement with the family intervention teams and the school.
Well, if we can be a conduit to being able to facilitate that better relationship, we'll be happy to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Daniel McCrossan, MLA.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. It's good to see Dale, Arlene and Tina, and I too would like to very quickly put on record my sincerest appreciation to Arlene and her team for the great work that she is doing and her team is doing for youth services across Northern Ireland, and for the assistance that has been kindly offered to me as the Assembly Member for West Tyrone in recent times, and the same with Dale's office as well, who's assisted with me over the last few weeks. I just want to thank you both directly. Minister, I'll jump straight into the questions. The Engage money was allocated according to a formula devised by your department. Are you aware that this formula managed to allocate 2 primary schools in the same small town the same amount of money? One school has almost 3 times the enrolment of the other and has close to a 20% higher social deprivation rate. One school is 250 pupils, the other is 750 pupils. The net result is that the school can spend the equivalent of slightly over £100 per child, while the other has £36 per child. Would you tell us how both schools, Minister, can equally address the ravages of COVID-19 on their respective children with such differentiating budgets? And might I add that this is not the only example that I could quote from the numbers throughout Northern Ireland. Your allocation of funding is driven with similar discrepancies, Minister, right across the country, and children will not be supported fairly as a consequence. Do you agree that the formula is a mess?
No, it's a short answer, but we get the very short. I was going to say, it's good to see you back in the flesh in relation. Look, there may well be some administrative, because in terms of the way the banding works, in terms of the numbers with the Engage programme, I don't believe that a figure where a school is 250 and one is 750, particularly if they're both in the same position as, roughly speaking, as regards free school meals, etc., should be the same. So that sounds like there's maybe been an error within that. The position, I suppose, was that we had levels of banding where, first of all, there was a higher figure went to schools that had above the average free school meals entitlement, which is 28%, and then it was banded within that on the basis of the size of the schools. Similarly, I think for those, so that there was not schools were not left entirely without support. For those that were below the average in terms of free school meals, the position was such that it should be there would be corrected a little bit. Sorry, in terms of the banding, yeah, look, there will be an allocation that is there. You know, the reality is that this is actually then to provide levels of support that can be out there. We could have spent a lot longer devising a scheme, but the idea was to get sort of money out to schools as quickly as possible, and therefore a banding system, which is something which happens in a number of other cases, will be the case. This is additional support that is there, and the freedom is given to the schools to be able to supply that money. So I don't believe that that is a level of mess. It will mean that whatever system you put in place can always be argued to be fairer to some than others. There's no perfect solution in relation to that, but this is actually a way of getting that money out directly to schools in a way which they can spend that quickly on that level of additional intervention and substitute cover.
Minister, first of all, thank you for your well wishes and as well for them when I was off. I'm sure that you've missed me. But in terms of the points that you've raised,
words cannot describe how much I've missed you, Danny.
I would say that. In terms of the figures that you've raised, I am familiar with the particular schools that I have raised. I'll not name them, but one of them has a social deprivation rate much lower than the other, and it just incidentally turns out to be the school with the smaller numbers of pupils. So I'm just wondering, because I have looked through the figures and I've used my own constituency because of my own local knowledge, as to how a school with 750 pupils can get the same level of funding as a school with 250 pupils, but when it comes down to per head, per pupil number, there's a massive contrast. And I know that the school with 250 pupils has a lesser rate of social deprivation, a lesser rate of free school meals than that of the much larger primary school. And I know that this issue is going to be raised with me because I have raised it at this committee in previous weeks as well, that this would be the case.
Well, because, Daniel, in relation to that, we wanted something which could get money to schools quickly. We wanted a formula which was both had a level of sense. Sorry, I should correct something I said earlier. In terms of the bandings on the free school meal entitlement side of things, yes, there is a banding which is above 200, which then goes up to 1,000. The idea was to provide particular blocks of money where schools could then, for example, get the equivalent of one full-time equivalent or half a full-time equivalent, rather than have 1,000 different rates of doing that. There'll also be different bits. So we took the differentiation bit of saying there would be a higher level of funding to schools that qualified, and this is quite often the case within government funding, that you pass a qualification threshold and then receive a certain amount of money. It was on the basis of where there was above average free school meal entitlement, and above average free school meal entitlement would be schools that would have 28% or more that would be of a higher bit. Now, that was something in terms of, for example, whenever Signature Project was rolled out a number of years ago, where it was then concentrated on those schools where they had a higher level of free school meal entitlement. And so you would get some level of disparity or anomalies, but this was to ensure then there was a level of support got to everyone. I think one of the criticisms that was there previously was the schools that fell below that 28% or below average free school meals were getting nothing. So we have a lower banded level of support, which can then mean that creates to levels of equivalent numbers of additional substitute cover or additional amount of intervention that can still take place in areas where there's a lower level of social deprivation.
Minister, I appreciate your answer, and I also appreciate that there is funding that has been allocated to schools, but I have concern. I haven't got time to continue on this today, but I have concern that two primary schools in my local area with significant difference in numbers will receive, one school will receive £100 per head, which is significant compared to the £36 per head. And I don't know how I'm going to justify or explain that to the principal of each individual school who have the same circumstances to tackle but have much larger numbers to deal with. And I just think that, Minister,
I think the only alternative to them would be a bespoke solution for all 1,000 schools in Northern Ireland, where they would all be receiving different amounts. You would have an argument about to what extent do you provide weighting for free school meals in terms of social deprivation within that formula. To what extent then do you reflect the numbers that are there, and to be able to get something which would then be in place to enable schools to start spending that from actually towards the end of September onwards. If you were going to be devising a scheme which simply was effectively bespoke for each school, realistically we'd actually be waiting, you'd be trying to get something which wouldn't be in place before this week.
We appreciate the complexity of the situation and the challenges that COVID has gave, but I'm just simply pointing out a very simple fact that's going to be fired at each of us very quickly in our respective constituencies, or indeed as our spokesperson's roles would include. I just think that the two bans that have been considered on this occasion are much too crude, and they're going to disproportionately affect one school over the other.
Strictly speaking, with free school meals, there are 4 separate bans in terms of numbers. There's then separate bit in terms. What's I?
Sorry, the number 4 band rather than 2 would have been much better. That's what I was to say.
Okay.
There are a total of 4 bands within the free school meal bit, and then 3 within the
final question.
Within the non-free school meal bit. So effectively, you could say there's equivalent of 7 bands. Look, I think if you were to start to disaggregate that a lot more, as I said, you would, and again, if you have you either have a situation where you have something that's bespoke for every school, or you have some level of banding. If you have some level of banding, you're always going to get a level of criticism where people will fall just either side of the band. I've seen this happening. If you're going to do something which is bespoke, which works a sort of certain formula in relation to that, then I think in devising that, administering it, and sending it out,
I think we'll come back
it's
on this.
But the point is being made.
Thank you, Minister, and again I do appreciate it is a complicated situation. I just want to touch on the SIA stuff as I have been. DE has recently provided correspondence to the committee, which we appreciate, including SIA's advice to you, Minister, on the 5th of the 4th, 2020 in respect of grade awarding options. SIA's recommendations in respect of GCSEs, AS and A levels appear to match the grade awarding models which were adopted prior to the 17th of August 2020. It is understood, Minister, that you, Minister, provided a second formal direction to SIA on the 12th of the 5th, 2020. In this regard, can you, Minister, confirm that this direction required SIA to adopt the recommended grade awarding models for GCSEs, AS and A levels, which were later abandoned on the 17th of August 2020? And if these grading models were decided upon by you, Minister, in May, why were they not published or shared with this committee or indeed anyone else prior to the 17th of August 2020? And finally, Minister, why has your department directed SIA not to pay examiners, moderators and invigilators, and have you directed SIA to repay all exam fees? A number of things in there, Minister, but mainly about the advice received. I think that's a critical point because we need to know and establish who was directing who when it came to the awarding that caused a huge amount of hurt to students and teachers.
I got advice from SIA in terms of, as indeed did other ministers in other jurisdictions, I got advice from SIA in terms of what the models should be, in terms of the awarding models for A levels, AS levels and GCSE. As in other jurisdictions, I took that advice, I agreed with that advice. From the point of view of directing, ultimately I'm the person who takes responsibility, I take the decision. Directing maybe gives an impression that that something I did was contrary to what SIA's advice is, so it was not a question of me imposing something on SIA. I take responsibility for that because the reality is that any solutions we're going to come up with are not going to be perfect in connection with that. In terms of we took legal advice on on your other issue in terms of the financing of examiners. Well, I should say first of all, in terms of any issues on any reimbursement towards students or schools, there's yet to be final advice received in connection with that. But specifically on the examiners side of it, examiners have been paid for the work that they have done. We got legal advice which indicates that in terms of examiners, in terms of invigilators, moderators, and indeed anybody providing that there is effectively a contract for services that, if you like, payment should only be there where those services have been provided. So people have been paid for all the preparation work which took place in connection with that. Legally, we'd be in a situation where we're paying people when there's no entitlement to that money, with the work, because of circumstances out there, control has not been done, and also in circumstances in which to do that, I think the initial suggestion was a particular group at the top of examiners, about 1,600 examiners, be paid and others not. Legally, that would be indefensible, and we've got advice out of the Department Solicitor's Office in terms of the way forward. That advice pointed to a direction that legally the safest option from a point of view of any form of challenge was the group should be treated equally, and indeed that there wasn't a legal entitlement for anybody to be paid. And also the overall cost, if we were paying everybody, would be an extra 4 million, which is not in budget.
And Minister, I appreciate you answering that question. I would like more detail in terms of the advice around SIA, but I want to touch on the examiners because it's a very topical issue at the minute and it's been raised with us.
Yeah.
Have you, the advice you received in the direction of travel that you've taken in relation to paying examiners, is it different than that in Scotland, Wales and England?
Well, I'm not sure the detail there, but we have got direct legal advice from the Department Solicitor's Office in connection with that. The position, and it may well be that the precise setup in terms of those contained within other jurisdictions may be in a different position, but here examiners, and indeed beyond that, people who would be invigilators, people who work below examiners, are on the basis of contract for services. They are not employees. And so the direct legal advice was firstly that there's no entitlement to pay beyond the work that's already been done, and roughly speaking examiners have received roughly about £1 million because of all the preparation work that they've been done, paid directly for that. But first of all, legally there was no entitlement, and indeed there would potentially be if you were paying people simply on the basis of a hope that they would get some work at some stage without being in an analogous position elsewhere. That would potentially have legal repercussive qualities across the public sector on a range of things, but also that the proposal that was put forward that only examiners out of that group of round about think off the top of my head, there was maybe about 4,000 or 5,000 people fell into different categories. Maybe wrong in that figure. That if you paid one group, legally it would be indefensible to do that without paying everybody the full amount. And essentially, this is additional money which people would get who simply are providing a service rather than their job or a full-time employment side of it. So I follow clearly the legal advice.
Need to move us on. Robbie Butler might ask something about this or comment on that as well, because I know he feels strongly about it. Very, very, very briefly, when will your independent review of grading from last year be started and finished?
Well, we would envisage it should be started relatively soon. As part of that, because it has to be independent, it is being we sought, I think, tenders from outside organisations to do that. I understand that's at a fairly advanced stage, but there's obviously commercial sensitivity around that. I think the envisaged bit, Chair, just to give you the sake of completeness, I think we would envisage that the work, once it is commenced, which should be commenced relatively soon, could then be done within about a period of about 6 weeks from commencement in relation to that. And there's been terms of reference have been signed off in connection with that.
Are you scoping a school assessed, teacher assessed model for 2021 should it be necessary?
We've instructed SAID to look at what fallback options, but it's undoubtedly the case, which will be the case, I think, across all jurisdictions, that everybody accepts that the best possible solution is for this to be based upon an exam-based situation. We've asked SAID for their examinations to scope out what a range of fallback options could be. I would, exams are the best.
And why 7 weeks into the new term have you yet to publish guidance for this year's curriculum and this year's assessment?
Because there's been, SAID produced advice, which is then, from a departmental point of view, we have also then sought views of stakeholders. And I know, for instance, even yesterday there was a meeting that took place. I would think we'll be in a position to be able to publish the information which relates to how the curriculum interacts with the examinations again, hopefully for the next few days. One of the other elements that we've got to ensure within that is that we ensure that our examinations have a level of comparability and portability. So there's also then a level of discussions that are ongoing, both in terms of exam timetable and broad direction of travel with other jurisdictions as well. Again, there's a meeting tomorrow morning of the Four Nations group of the education ministers, and I hope that will be the final position which will then enable us to move forward. So I anticipate something fairly straightforward. It's important that we support our pupils in their progression on that basis so we don't disadvantage anybody.
Thank you. Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. I'll start with the Minister, if that's okay, just to keep on topic here, Minister, because there's a couple of things that were brought out by Daniel and the Chair, which I'd like to just tease out a bit further. So I'm glad to hear that you've said that perhaps within days you will be able to give us further clarification to the sector and around the curriculum and assessment. That's certainly the number one lobby that I'm getting at the moment from both students and stakeholders, teachers and rep bodies, so that will be very welcome. You've also intimated that the preferred assessment will be exams. And on Daniel's point about the assessors and moderators, if that's the case and you're reliant on those moderators and assessors to be there next year to perform that function, and bear in mind that the right decision was made on sub-teachers with regard to receiving a payment of some kind, what's the difference between sub-teachers who had no work guaranteed and examiners and moderators?
I suppose, directly speaking, the analogy of what's happened in other parts of the UK where, in terms of sub-teachers, I think sub-teachers have been probably a particular case. First of all, it was something that was directly funded, largely speaking, by the executive centrally. For a lot of sub-teachers, I think there's also, if you look behind the situation, we rely in terms of sub-teachers, and indeed many sub-teachers, that is effectively a full-time job for them. There are people who will be dependent upon their mortgages, they'll be dependent upon if you pull the rug from under them, there is a major bit. From the point of view of examiners or cohorts there, on that basis, roughly speaking, the fees would be around about £500. But it is also the fact that it is a direct contract for services that first of all, there is not an entitlement and that if indeed you were paying examiners, there's a range of other groups you would have to pay similarly because it would not survive legal challenge within that. And again, it's about, again, paying for people for the services that they provide on that basis.
Okay, just in terms of then, that there's a potential risk then that their services as required next year may not be able, and may be a need for you to sub out for that. With regard to...
Again, it's not about people who would be examiners. As we're saying, generally speaking, these people who would be either retired teachers who are doing this. I mean, clearly, for instance, nobody's going to survive on simply £500 a year for that particular period of time. They are people that actually, again, through no fault of their own, the preparation work that they did ultimately was not needed, but they've been paid fully for that. Around about £1 million is paid directly to examiners in terms of actually a period post-April in connection with that. So, look, there is no solution which is entirely watertight in that regard, but from a legal point of view, that was the clear legal advice that I received, that was the best option that was there from a legal point of view.
No problem. This isn't the question, Minister, so genuinely doesn't require an answer. You used an analogy of £500 per year. There are examples of particularly female ex-teachers who perhaps don't have a good pension and who supplement their income through this quite significantly, actually, into the 4 and 5 figure scale. So those people will be disproportionately affected. With regard to the ongoing situation with COVID, Minister, have you been in any discussions about a circuit breaker in and around half-term and any extension to the
Well, no. Can I indicate, well, I mean, I don't think there's been any formal discussions. Clearly, I suppose maybe just disaggregate, which will also be in relation to the executive as a whole has got to take a broader position as regards the levels of restrictions that are there. I think it's probably well known that the Department of Health have drawn up a range of measures which at some point, could be examined or being used. I think from the point of view of a circuit breaker, I think if we were to do that, my preference certainly would be that schools still remain open within that. Now, it's noticeable, for example, if we use, because I think they've probably been clearer in terms of the overall position compared to jurisdictions. If we use the position of the Republic of Ireland, for instance, they have different, if you like, levels of response that is there. But it's noticeable that even in the most extreme lockdown situation of level 5 in the Republic of Ireland, this is still on the basis of childcare and education, schools remaining open. I think part of the problem, I know we've had the discussion about what mitigation measures, what remote learning measures can be. If children miss further elements of school, I think that will be both damaging to their education and also there is a strong argument that the more children miss, however much we try and put mitigation measures in place, it will always hit those who are more socially disadvantaged a harder level than others. So, and I think there's been a strong commitment from the executive to try as much as possible to support education. Now, could there be circumstances in which some of those things evolve? We shall have to wait and see, but certainly it's not something that I would want to see on the radar.
No, I appreciate that, Minister, and I wasn't pushing for it. I was just looking for clarity for teachers and some who have asked.
No, I mean, and the nature, I suppose, Robbie, the nature of Northern Ireland being what it is, on a whole range of issues, various rumours will go about. We will see through social media things which haven't even been discussed, presented as being facts. But look, from that point of view, we've made it very clear in any level of broader discussion on restrictions. It certainly has been my position of the department that as much as possible, education itself needs to be protected. And I think, to be fair, in terms of a broader position from executive members, I think various members out of all parties have said that they see the key priority throughout all of this as being protecting education as much as possible.
Okay, final one for yourself, Minister, if that's okay. It's around flu jabs for teachers. So obviously our teachers have been under immense stress. Genuinely, I mean, we're now, 7 weeks into the new term. They've worked extraordinarily hard and we want to protect them as much as possible. We've talked about mental health and the need for helplines and so on. To protect them further, as we move into the winter pressures and so on, has there been any discussions at all with PHA about teachers availing of flu jabs?
Well, I think Department of Health, in terms of flu jab, and PHA will do lists of prioritisation. I'd certainly be. I think the more people that we can get with flu jabs, I think it tends to be that they will tend to prioritise, the tradition has always been with free jobs, tend to be prioritised according to both age and clinical, but rather than profession. But if there's any way that we can help facilitate sort of jobs, certainly we would be supportive of that.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to shift very briefly to the rest of the guys in the room. Arlene, Tina and Mr. Hannah, thank you guys for all the help that you've been so far. Arlene, if just one short one for yourself. With regard to diversionary strategies that a lot of youth organisations have been operating for a number of years, have you any concerns about those at the moment and how difficult it is to operate those virtually? And is there anything coming back from those bodies to indicate that there's any sort of issues at the moment?
First of all, we've been able to provide 91 interventions during the summer through the Executive Office funding, diverting young people away from antisocial behaviour around bonfire times, and that work was very successfully completed, and it was safely completed. We have had 3,561 youth interventions with young people in conjunction with the PSNI for children and young people who were involved in antisocial behaviour around July and August as well. So at this moment in time, we have very good protocols in place. Our health colleagues and our social service colleagues have come on board with that, and we are able to respond to the needs of young people on the streets and in our communities when they are vulnerable. That being said, we are standing up generic youth services, so we have not got on-street youth work and detached and outreach work that happens normally at this time operating, but we're working towards establishing that towards the end of October, subject to any further restrictions. So actually, in terms of, we just had a review meeting yesterday actually with the Assistant Chief Constable to look at what the interventions were over the summer and the impact of that, and everyone was very pleased that actually the communication between organisations and at a government level, us working together, was strengthened. The interface with children and young people increased, and there was a decrease in the number of young people being arrested and outcomes that can sometimes affect our children and young people negatively in the community. So at this moment in time, we're actually very pleased with the situation that we're in, and Queen's University, through Dr. Colin Walsh, is actually writing up this practice to see what we can look at in terms of the data, and we're going to get ahead of this so that before Christmas we have plans in place moving towards next year again, so that we're providing these interventions all year round, not just leaving it to the last minute. Okay,
thank you. And I've been told by the chair my time's up, so I'm just going to ask this very, very briefly. So just for Tina, Tina, is there, given what we've learned in the childcare sector, if we are to see more restrictions or a lockdown, in terms of the advice and guidance that will be given to the sector, is it ready? If that is the case, what's the contingency plan? And then for Dale, if there's any update on free school meals and uniform grants and any outstanding payments and what that looks like at the moment. Thanks, guys.
Can I suggest that I think Catherine Kelly may ask about childcare as well, if you want to double those up. And Dale, do you want to come in on free school meals?
Yeah. In terms of free school meals, Robbie, we know that across the system there's about somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 applications that we have received that don't have the appropriate supporting evidence. And we are currently actively, my teams are currently actively contacting those parents to make sure that we get that supporting evidence. We have also, though, written out to schools to advise that, look, where there's an absolute humanitarian need, that a school meal should be provided.
A uniform grants, anything in that, Dale?
Robbie, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but all I know is that my understanding is our teams are up to date with the payment of uniform grants.
Okay.
How many applications were without supporting evidence?
1,000, 1,500.
Somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500, Chris.
Okay.
Chair, sorry.
Okay. It's okay. Okay. Robbie, thank you. I'll bring William Humphrey in, and I'm fairly certain Catherine Kelly will ask about childcare, and Tina, you can give us a childcare update at that point, hopefully. William Humphrey?
Okay, thank you. Morning, everyone, and thanks very much. Can I, as a governor in schools, also join in thanking everyone involved in the education estate in terms of the work they've been doing in schools in preparing them for kids going back. I particularly want to thank the Minister for all his hard work, because I think it's fair to say whatever criticisms, some of them unfairly, he receives, particularly at this committee, the Minister is very active and proactive around these issues. His department officials, DE officials, and in particular I want to thank Arlene Key and her team, and in my area Mark McBride and his colleagues. I declare an interest as a member of the Scout Association, and I want to draw attention to the letter that we all received last week from Claire King and the Uniform Youth Work Hub around outdoor events. I have to say that this is something which really exercised me, because I had contact from BB captains, Scout leaders, Guide leaders and Scout and Guide commissioners around these issues, because they were unable to do things last weekend that they were able to do the weekend before, the same events. And I know there was a meeting which took place on Monday the 28th of September, which Arlene, I think you had attended with your colleague. And what has been indicated to me is that what more guidance were actually presented as rules and had to be adhered to. And I think around the policy of restart for youth services, it almost appears to me, and I've spoken to a lot of youth leaders around this issue over the last week, that was provided for schools seemed to be lifted and put for youth and uniformed organisations, and that doesn't really fit or work. Arlene, would you come back to me on that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
First of all, we engaged with young people and with our volunteers and with our youth staff to provide the guidance. In terms of the Minister's opening statement, the guidance that we have is mandatory for our statutory staff and is guidance for the voluntary and community sector, and it's up to them to take that and to consider within their own governance and management arrangements how they apply that, with concern that we want to make sure that mitigating factors and the safety of children and young people is paramount. The guidance that the Youth Service has provided in the Education Authority has been based on, yes, the new school day and the school guidance. It, however, has been adopted to the youth setting and covers a number of factors, including how to support staff, which is separate and very different and distinct, understanding that children voluntarily participate in youth service, it's not mandatory. How to prepare your youth facilities, and we actually provided a video walking around the centre to show an example of how you would have all your signage and all your protective factors physically placed. Guidance on detached and outreach work, on how to use public transport and dedicated youth work, youth transport, on social distancing. We even gave curriculum materials as a sample only for staff to be able to look how they could support each other and for us to be able to support our children and young people. So in summary, the guidance is based on that of the PHA guidance and the Chief Medical Officer. And we are in a very agile situation where, as the Minister says, we are responding to the ongoing needs in particular situations. And we are in a case and point at this moment in time where there is increased cases of COVID-19 and greater concerns. And with that regard, we have asked the Chief Medical Officer for distinct advice on leaving your centre, your youth centre, going on what we call an educational visit, going to an outdoor centre, residential centre, and they are paused at this moment in time. So the situation is very agile, and we were responding to the fact that there are increased concerns and risks that we want to mitigate against.
I would say this, all of the people I spoke to are very responsible people. They did the necessary preparatory work the week before, they put in place the risk assessments and all of that, and they found it incredulous that the situation had changed. Now, new regulations have been put in place by the Northern Ireland Government in relation to Londonderry and Strabane, but these seem to be being applied right across Northern Ireland. And all I would say is this, these people are volunteers, highly trained in terms by their organisations, but volunteers are having to work alongside what you're saying is guidance they saw as rules that had to be adhered to. They also have to work alongside their churches and the rules and the guidance that their churches are coming out of, from their headquarters there. And I would say, and I want to thank you and the Minister for calls you took from me last Friday around this issue. But I would say this respectfully, more work needs to be done with those organisations, and I made this point to you last Friday on the phone, with Scouts, Guides, BB and GB and so on, to ensure that the communication is there, that there's clarity and certainty for them around these issues, because let's be clear, indications went out earlier in the year that outdoor work was safer, and a lot of this outdoor work, which you're talking about as educational visits, a lot of that outdoor work will continue for scouting and guiding, in particular over the autumn and winter. Yet we will have scout groups and guide companies meeting in church halls. So we need to be absolutely clear around that. And the other thing would make this point as well, in relation to the centres that these organisations run, at Crawfordsburn for Scouts, Lorne for Guides, Ganaway for the Boys Brigade, Ballyhornan for Scouting Ireland, these organisations need clarity around that, because those particular centres, which are very well run, very well maintained, are large cost centres for these organisations, cannot operate to their maximum. Obviously, at the moment, they are under huge pressure. And the other thing is, I just read a report earlier today, there could be 15,000 jobs lost across the United Kingdom in terms of, that's a statement put out by Outdoor Works, UK Outdoors. So we need to be absolutely clear and be getting that information through, so that these organisations are able to disseminate this out to the thousands of leaders they have who do valuable work, hugely valuable work in our community. And I don't think we're at that point yet, and I hope that we will be in the near future. And that's purely the point that I wanted to make this morning. As someone who's involved in scouting and who's aware of the work, the commitment that uniformed organisations and youth organisations do all year round, hugely important, not least in the stuff you were talking about there about diversionary issues in an area like my own in North Belfast, and they need all the support they can get. And I think that needs more.
Yeah, I think Arlene's going to respond, yes. Right.
Just to give a brief summary of the mitigation and the communication that we have in place. Last week I met with representatives from the 4 main churches, and we are looking to see how the uniformed sector, who are currently at a disadvantage because a lot of churches are not given them access to their premises, how we can work together, and we are working on a plan at that level. We have senior officials within the youth service currently looking at uniformed organisations who do not have access to their normal third-party provision, and we are looking to see where within the Education Authority estate we can provide for them free of charge starting in the next 2 weeks. Thirdly, the Uniformed Hub and the full-time officials from the uniformed sector have a direct access to me personally as their direct contact for any issues they have, including access to Chief Medical Officer for any concerns, and we meet once a week to scenario plan and look at all their issues. That doesn't mean to say we won't get it wrong. What we are doing is being very clear that we are in a very agile position. We are making ourselves very available. We are working hard on advice and guidance, and we're dealing with a very fluid situation. And I am confident that we have the appropriate channels and problem-solving, solution-focused responses in place to deal with this issue, and we appreciate it that it's very fluid. So I take on board all that you're saying, William, and we are working very hard to understand this. The Minister has made progress, and we have obviously got very great concerns about our outdoor centres and the cost associated with that, and are working with colleagues to address that as well.
Yeah, because I just finished with this. I got an email from our local guide commissioner who pointed out to me that 5 ranger guides were meant to do the Duke of Edinburgh Gold expedition last weekend, and they had complied and had all been arranged in terms of accordance with the COVID regulations, and it had to be cancelled because hiking is not allowed. Obviously, they were hugely disappointed, but one girl in particular who was coming, who's from Northern Ireland, currently studying university in England, had to come back over the weekend and then come back, and it had to be cancelled last minute. So she used out considerable expense for an expedition for her Duke of Edinburgh Gold that couldn't take place. Thanks.
Yeah, I think they're very, very valid points as well. Look, I think the only other thing I'd say as well in connection with this, and I think it's important because sometimes people when they think of voluntary organisations, don't realise that at a wider level there are employment issues as well, which is part of whatever response the executive does in a range of things. It's got to bear in mind what impact this has on people's lives and their livelihoods. I suppose the other area where arguably we are slightly vulnerable will be if there is shifting ground at different stages on what can happen either indoors or outdoors, generally in settings. And at the moment, we're probably in a direction of travel where sometimes some of those restrictions in a wider context are getting tightened up. That might mean what is doable in one particular period a week or two later may not be doable, on that side of things. But we will certainly try to work to maximise what can be done within USIs, notwithstanding, as I said, that we may have a wider context taken sort of beyond simply what happens within the department.
Thanks, Darlene, and no criticism, but it's just all I'm saying, have communication and clarity and certainty around these issues. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, William. Minister, just before I bring Catherine Kelly in quickly, can I just quick point of clarification? Are pupils self-isolating counted as present in school?
No.
Definitely not.
I don't believe so. No, I think this is about attendance. The figures that we have on that are attendance directly in school, as opposed to being.
Okay.
Sorry, I think Dale wanted to come in just there.
Yeah. Chair, just to confirm, there's a special code for those children that are self-isolating that are used by schools.
So when you're saying there's X% attendance at school, that
those are physically in the building.
That does not include self-isolating pupils.
Yeah.
It doesn't include self-isolating pupils.
No, the figures. So when I was quoting figures around about I think 1 week was about 91.3, another week was 94.5. Whatever the exact figures. Okay. Those are directly.
Can I bring in Catherine Kelly? Do you have a question for the Minister?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Arlene, Minister, Dale and Tina. My first question is in relation to Nurture, Minister, and it's in relation to the announcement of funding being allocated recently to the 15 schools, and that has been very, very welcome, and we can never underestimate the importance of Nurture for our children and our young people and the profound effect it has on them in the future. The criteria your department has used is very important. However, I am curious as to if there was a rural needs impact assessment carried out. I noticed that there wasn't one rural school included in the 15 new named schools and wondered, was this something that was taken into consideration? As I'm sure you're aware, there are many rural areas with high deprivation and need, with schools in these areas struggling to provide nurture without the much needed additional funding. St Mary's Primary School in Pomeroy is but one of these schools, and they have been providing nurture for many years, and they actually participated in various studies carried out by Queen's and other universities because of their dedication to the nurture programme. And I also noted that there wasn't a school at all in West Tyrone in my constituency included either. And one particular school in an area of high deprivation is Christ the King Primary School in Omagh. They too have a dedicated nurture unit essential in supporting children in this area and are also in need of funding to continue this vital programme. Minister, I would ask if you would commit to visiting the rural school like St Mary's in Pomeroy so that they can actually show you the work that they have been doing down through the years and the difference that is making to the children who attend the school and in the community, and also to visit Christ the King in Omagh, who have also ticked all the boxes in relation to the criteria used. And just to say that any of the school leaders who I have been speaking to, none of them have said or have doubted your commitment to nurture, but they have said that the current budget needs to be increased for schools to be able to continue nurture provision in the time ahead, because we are in unprecedented circumstances. There are a lot of pressures on our children and young people, and never before has nurture been so important. So that's just my first question, Chair. So going back, I know there's a bit of a ramble there, Minister, but
No, Catherine. I suppose just to answer, I know you maybe want to come, maybe Tina will deal with whatever the next question is on childcare. Look, can I say, in terms of increasing budget, it's like a lot of things. If I had more money, I'd be very keen to spend that. And I think nurture units, which I think have been there under different ministers and times whenever we didn't, have proven to be, I think, a considerable success. Part of the additional funding this year is also to try to mainstream that nurture provision as much as possible. There were strict criteria that were applied and schools ranked. So I suppose, if you like, for a number of schools, and I would be aware, again, without going to these, you mentioned that there wasn't any in West Tyrone. I suppose I could say, for instance, in my own constituency, and I think I know of one that maybe fell a little bit below the number, I think would have been ranked like 17th or whatever. There was none out of my constituency either in that regard. I'll be happy. I think fairly soon I'm due to be on visit to Oma. I don't know if we'll have time in terms of to be able to incorporate those couple of visits, but if not, I'll be more than happy if I get an invitation to try to visit those couple of schools within that. I suppose this might be, if I'm being slightly pedantic in terms of the rurality. According to the strict definition, which will be something I think that from a common sense point of view will have to change soon, strictly speaking, the vast majority of the schools were actually rural schools, because the current legal definition that is there of rural schools is basically any school that is outside the old sort of basically the old Belfast City Council boundaries, and up in the northwest, anything else in the country, even if it was in the middle of Craigavon or Lisburn, actually technically speaking counts as a rural school. But I appreciate that. But it's on the basis of those that met the criteria to get over the line, first of all, to be considered, and then sort of ranked according to the objective criteria it needs. But look, visiting schools where they've had that nurture bit, we wanted to make sure it's expanded, because the other bit of the announcement was also that those schools which have previously received funding, that was guaranteed, that has been guaranteed and locked in within the mainstream bit. And again, I think the money that we're providing in terms of nurture is where the budget then will be as we move ahead into the future years. If there's more money that can be provided, then it will be. But there's still considerably a gap between what we would, but on a range of issues, would like to be spent on and what we've actually got. There will be a level of gap. But I was keen, even if money was tight, to ensure that there was a considerable level of expansion, at least in that nursery. But if I'd been able to announce 50 rather than 15, I'd have been very happy to do so in that regard.
Just going back, Minister, sorry, just on the fact that anywhere that's outside of Belfast or the northwest, it's something that if that is that's something that the department has to abide by, then there's a serious issue there.
I think, Catherine, from that point of view, that has been a historical thing which we're actually looking at a formula, and I suppose, again, stuff that will be coming to a conclusion very soon. They actually say that actually, if you look at, for instance, what is being defined as rural by, say, Department for Communities or DAERA, and I think, I'm not quite sure, one slight complication is what is counted as a rural-urban mix is entirely uniform throughout government in Northern Ireland. We're trying, though, to bring a sort of a redefinition, probably based on settlement numbers through NISRA, which would then change that. I think it's just where we're putting the boundary point between the two, is just to be entirely safe. Because the other flip side of that is you could get a school which, for instance, is genuinely in the countryside, if we can put it that way, that is, say, 5 miles outside the city of Londonderry, for instance. And technically speaking, at the moment, that counts as an urban school. So I think there's an anomaly on both sides on it, and it's something that fairly shortly will get changed.
I hope so, because there needs to be equality of opportunity here in relation to all children across the north.
Well,
And
that's why, yeah, but that's why the criteria, particularly the nurture bit, was on the basis of objective need on that
Yeah.
regard. And to some extent, whether somebody's in an urban setting, whether in a rural setting, and probably to be fair, there's quite a few of us out there in different towns throughout Northern Ireland that wouldn't. I mean, I know that particularly on this basis, it's got to be either counted as urban or rural. I suppose there's a lot of us who live in various settlements that wouldn't really consider themselves either an urban setting or a rural setting, but leave that aside for the moment. It's got to be on the basis of objective need, and simply because somebody is living in one particular location rather than another, they've got to be treated fairly with one another.
Well, I think that's why the Rural Needs Act is crucial here, to ensure that, you know, if it is used and it has been applied in this case, that children haven't been disadvantaged who live in rural areas, because it has been something that has, you know, different departments down through the years, rural people have felt that isolation, I suppose, and here it's just today that we have more rural schools feeling that same isolation, and a difference is being made. So I would just, if possible, some clarity possibly in writing.
There's no, we'll get clarity, there's no discrimination against it. I think the only issue for a nurture unit to work will require at least that school to be sustainable, have a certain level of numbers, which I suppose, but having said that, can also be the case in some urban areas where they don't meet that criteria either. And that will be the same also for certain levels of capital build and a range of other things, but it's not necessarily purely through rurality or even urbanisation.
Okay. Okay, Catherine.
Just one further question, Chair. Just in relation to childcare.
Catherine, can I make a suggestion that we maybe get Tina to answer this question? By all means, ask it as well. We'll get Tina to answer it.
Happy to.
And then maybe that creates time for a quick question from Justin and Morris, Minister. Is that, Catherine, do you want to ask the question, and then I'll try and get it? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be as brief as possible. Tina, in relation to childcare, I'm really happy to hear this morning that work is underway, and the discussions are happening around financially supporting the childcare sector through the winter months. We have been hearing in the last number of days of settings, some settings being at their wits' end, more or less, and possibly having to close their doors. And I know that when we met with yourself and the Minister recently, myself and Karen, you took on board to also look at including the settings which are community settings, and I think there are 74 of them across the north, and just, you know, to reiterate the need for them settings to also be included in any plans going forward. It's with COVID cases on the rise across the north, we are seeing where a good few number of settings are, you know, it's not sustainable for them to stay open because of families keeping their children at home. So it's just to make that point, and also in relation to the childcare strategy, it's really good to hear that the discussions are ongoing there, and that the all-party group was instrumental in that, Minister. So and looking forward to the innovation labs whenever they happen, hopefully as early as possible in the new year.
Okay. Can I bring in Justin then for a question to the Minister? And then we need to try and get you away, Minister. Justin?
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, I've more than a quick question. I think I should be designated the same amount of time as every other member. I'm not a second-class member of this committee, and
Try my best. Go ahead.
The discourse should be chaired and such so that every member gets a chance to raise their views, because each member's opinion is important.
Go ahead.
The Minister, the attendance of teachers, non-teaching staff and pupils since restart at 92 to 96% is extraordinary, given that we are in the throes of a global pandemic. The attendance of special schools at between 85 and 90%, that is incredible. I think there's been an awful lot of doom and gloom, but given the circumstances, that is extraordinarily positive. And it signals the trust parents have in our teachers. Monday past was World Teachers' Day. Will you join with the Minister now in heaping praise on our teachers, on our teaching staff, non-teaching staff, and our principals, in creating an environment whereby parents are confident about sending their kids to school in the midst of this global pandemic?
Yes, Justin, I'm very happy to do so. I think there's been a lot of hard work that's been done, and I think it is a buy-in of confidence in parents, in our teaching and non-teaching staff, and our broader school system that was provided through our schools. Just in the interest of being succinct type of thing.
Okay, 3,786 childcare facilities in the north, 3,066 have reopened post-COVID, 720 are still closed. That's 20%. Given that 72% of workers with children under 16 live in a household where all the adults work, are you concerned that there is now an issue around access to childcare?
Well, sorry, I should say in terms of the statistics, the figures actually for sort of the day nurseries and the day nurseries with school placement, the figures are around about 94, 97%. What actually brings down those figures is if you're counting individually separately, individual childminders, there's a gap of about 20% on those. That's where that tends to bring down the figure. Probably in terms of, maybe just for the sake of time, if I'll deal with any of the non-childcare stuff on it, and then maybe at the end, maybe Tina can deal with some of those questions, because I'll need to go fairly soon in that regard, Justin, but I'm sure Tina will pick up any of the childcare issues.
Okay, move on to CCA, which Robbie touched on earlier. Teachers have contacted me who are at their wits' end in terms of what the content they are supposed to be actually teaching. And I'll read out a quick message from one teacher in particular. Just a question that maybe isn't easily answered, but as one of many frustrated teachers in the north, we are almost into the second week of October, and we as schools have had no response to the CCA consultation regarding GCSEs yet. This is a disgrace and leaves the students not knowing what exactly they are doing, and us teachers not knowing exactly what content we should be teaching. If any influence, could you ask the questions of those who can ask them? So,
okay,
I want to take grade-level teachers as well.
Yeah,
they're really concerned.
Yeah, to some extent, I dealt with this earlier. We've worked in the last, not just with CCA, but also stakeholders, but also particularly as regards GCSEs in A-levels. We want to make sure that what's there is compatible with, to make sure that our students are not disadvantaged. I hope to bring that process to an end with information by the end of this week.
Okay, in terms of the PHA guidance on self-isolation of staff, that's created a little bit of an issue for school principals, Minister. And for those staff who have tested negative but are still self-isolating, and consistency is key for teaching, especially for primary school children. Are you concerned that there are so many teachers potentially having to self-isolate who have already tested negative but are not able to return to school? And are principals being supported in having substitute teachers provided at no extra cost to their schools, and how is that dynamic unfolding on the ground?
There's funding, in relation to, look, we have to, and I don't want to make it sound obvious that we have any level of contract. We follow in terms of where people have to self-isolate directly on the PHA advice, and sometimes that will mean people who have directly tested negative but still under the PHA advice will have to do that, because it's also the case that you could actually test negative on one day and still be a situation a few days down the line, could actually have developed symptoms at that stage and test positive. It's not absolutely clear-cut in that regard. In terms of the situation, there's been funding that's been made available via the executive to schools that will particularly cover the issue of substitute teachers. That is being, largely speaking, administered by the EA, and what EA, I think, have said is that in terms of the funding bit of it, that will be effectively demand-driven where possible on that basis. I don't know if Dale wants to say anything.
I think probably just that we pull together the costs in terms of what that currently is, and then collate that across the system. Justin, at this stage, we're asking schools to code any COVID-related cost to a specific code, including the cost of additional sub-cover. So that is being collated on a system-wide basis, and then we can work with colleagues in DE around the funding for that.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Thank you, Minister. In terms of a circuit breaker, Minister, has the input of the unions been sought from the department?
In terms of specifically, well,
Potentially in relation to circuit breaker, in terms of relation to that impact on school.
a circuit breaker overall would be a wider discussion directly for the executive in relation to that. Look, I've indicated, I think, that it is the case, as with other jurisdictions, that education should be protected as much as possible. But directly speaking, whether there will be a circuit breaker, whether or not, will not be a decision for the Department of Education directly. We will have a view on that, but it will be an executive-wide decision, and probably may well be a decision which will also be taken in terms of, and I know Deputy First Ministers have been in touch with, be it Prime Minister Taoiseach, other devolved, so those things will also, I think, probably be taken in a wider. I think for Northern Ireland to do something on a sort of a solo run basis would probably not be, in either direction, be particularly helpful in that regard. So it's a wider issue for the executive.
Okay, well, I think the union should be, their guidance or their input should be sought in terms of how that will impact them and their members. In terms of dyslexia, and there was a commitment made that the supports for children with dyslexia would be the same post-COVID as pre-COVID. That is not the case. I've been contacted by parents who are really concerned that their children are not getting the same level of support. Can you give me some sort of assurance, Minister, that that's going to be addressed?
Well, Justin, if you want to send us on that basis, we're happy to explore it up. If you send us the details, but don't obviously the details about impact on dyslexia to hand on it. But if you want to send us the details, we'll chase that up for you and the committee. Okay.
School meals, Minister. Hot school meals are provided to kids only who are on free school meals. Other children don't have access to that in some schools. What's your perspective on that issue?
Well, so Dale come in just in written.
I'm happy to say, Justin, my information is that 90% of all schools are currently providing hot meals to all pupils. Yes, there are a small number where it is only to free school meal pupils at the moment, and our catering teams are working with each of those schools on an individual basis to try and ensure that hot school meals are provided elsewhere within the school. But some of those are related to particular circumstances in schools, and again, if you have specific details, I'm happy to try and take that forward on behalf of yourself.
Thank you, Dale. And Minister, in relation to outdoor residential centres who are already struggling, have already experienced tough times over recent years, will you commit to providing funding and support for them throughout this pandemic and beyond?
Well, Justin, from that point of view, we're trying to get things open as much as possible. We can look at bids, but there isn't anything additional in budget in relation to those things, but we'll try and work with. But we're dependent upon public health advice in relation to that, on that side of it as well.
Okay, listen, Minister, thank you very much for sticking with me. Derek Baker's stepping away soon. At what stage does Derek move on?
Well, to be fair, it will not be that far away. I'm probably not ideal to deal with personnel issues, to be honest, on that side of it, Justin. But
no, I just was concerned that the post will be refilled promptly. Obviously, it's crucially important in the midst of the pandemic that there is a permanent secretary by our side to.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Justin. I suppose there would be HR processes that would need to be gone through. Obviously, that's an internal civil service recruitment. We wouldn't be wanting to hold a post open for any longer than it has to be in that regard on it. And I think we'll all miss Derek in that regard on it. But certainly, if I could have a permanent secretary who could take some of the flack from the committee on occasions, I'd be very welcome to have somebody sort of funding.
We all miss Derek from that perspective. Derek has been steady, and we wish him well, and we listen to your side. And thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Arlene, and thank you, Dale. I really appreciate your time.
Minister, Maurice Bradley's our last MLA, and your colleague. You'd be glad to take a question from him?
That's okay. I've got time to take that. If there's any supplementary questions, I know there was a few things on childcare that
we'll follow those up with the officials.
If I take from Maurice, then I'll have to go with the rest of the officials.
Thank you, Maurice.
Okay. Yeah. I hope you can hear me all right, Minister. Minister, thank you and your officials for turning up today and yourself available for the questions and for the answers so far. I suppose being last on the list, most of the headline topics have been covered. One that I heard this morning. Can you hear me all right? Yeah.
You broke up.
You're breaking up a wee bit, Maurice.
I apologise. I have a very, very poor connection here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yep.
Well, start again. Thanks to the Minister for his attendance and for his answers so far, and also for his team. I have been contacted this morning by a parent at a school in the Korean area. 2 teachers have tested positive for COVID-19, and I understand that HA has had input into the operation guidance was issued by the Department of Education, and I would make reference to the joint assurance group around the deployment of mobile testing units. And I suppose, thinking of recent measures rolled out at various state council, the Minister's already covered his department's engagement with the PHA, but could I ask the Minister, has there been any engagement using MPUs at schools to help identify and stem the spread of this virus?
Well, I think we're working with it. I caught bits of that. Like, we're working on a constant basis in relation to that. I think in terms of there's been a limited amount so far from Department of Health in terms of mobile testing units on that basis, but we're keen to carry on that level of work. I think that part of it is, generally speaking, trying to ensure that people get tests fairly quickly. Now, I think that some of the technology for very rapid tests hasn't maybe been able to deploy just as quickly as it should do. I think, to be fair, we're probably, in terms of speed of turnaround in Northern Ireland, it's ultimately a question for health, but I think we've tended to have a quicker turnaround in terms of testing facilities than other jurisdictions. What is critical, though, as well, which I think was one of the messages that we've got out as well through PHA, is that quite often, not simply confined to parents, but in the wider context, people sometimes are contacting the PHA where tests aren't really necessary. So it's about ensuring that those who need to get the tests on that basis.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Take another wee question.
Go ahead.
It's in relation to school transport, and I know that the economic downturn following the COVID-19 lockdown has been severe, and I've been contacted by a number of parents who have no support getting their child from a countryside setting to their nearest primary school. Under payment made annually in January to cover for the year, but one parent in particular is spending £55 per week on taxi fares to ensure her 4-year-old child attends school. Has been offered a payment of £185. That's inadequate, and I understand that this is a common occurrence across Northern Ireland that needs more than a standardised transfer from the EA transport section.
Well,
what's your thoughts, Minister?
Maybe hand over to Dale. That was a wee bit sort of broken up there, Morris, but.
I mean, Morris, in broad terms, we're providing transport assistance to about 85,000 children. A small number of those, that about 3,000 across the province, we provide financial assistance through our parental payment scheme. The first thing I would say is that it's assistance. It's not necessarily there to cover the whole cost of the transport costs that are, primarily it's parental responsibility. In terms of the scheme was set up in such a way that those pupils that live further away do get a higher amount. So if you're quoting the figure of £185, that would indicate to me that the children are living relatively close to the school. But look, the scheme is there. It's not there to provide the full cost of transport. But again, if you want to write to me with the details of the individual parent, we can have a look at that in a little bit more detail. Broadly speaking, though, if we have small numbers of pupils, we will not be able to put in a transport provision for them because it's not efficient.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Chair.
Thanks, Morris. Minister, thank you very much. I'll be honest, there is a fairly concerning lack of information in relation to some of the key school restart issues there. Hopefully we can return to them with you. Will you be making a ministerial statement in relation to curriculum and assessment 2021?
No, I think the intention would be that we'd get the information out. Hopefully, if things could be sorted out by the end of this week, we want to get it as rapidly as there. Obviously, one of the things, given there's been some concerns about delays as well, in connection with that, Chair, we want as soon as things are finalised to get that out there. Obviously, with the Assembly, you couldn't do anything until next week, for instance, if we were looking to make a statement. But no, I think we'll get the information out.
Accurate, Minister. You could use the ad hoc committee, as far as I'm aware. Again, given you did.
I think the ad hoc committee's largely speaking stood down. My understanding on it.
It's not. No. It's not.
Well, look,
I understand.
We'll get the stuff out. We'll get the stuff out. We'll get the stuff out in the next few days in that regard. Better go here, folks. But so thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Tina, to wrap us up, would you like to provide a bit more update in relation to childcare issues?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
I'll just cover sort of the three main things that I've covered. In terms of, there was revised guidance issued out last Friday for childminders for settings, and there was also a parents' letter from the Chief Medical Officer. Just in taking on Robbie's point, we do work closely with the childcare reference group to hear the operational issues as they happen. We meet on a weekly basis. So any guidance or any additional information that is required, we will update with our Department of Health colleagues, who will liaise with the PHA and get that information out as quickly as possible. In terms of Catherine's few points, yes, we are looking at, we have no funding made available, as the Minister had highlighted in his opening remarks, but we are working closely behind the scenes with the reference group, and we're looking at really two subsets. One is to look at the funding and the requirements for the temporary closures. We know that there are a few who are having to close on taking public health advice in terms of COVID issues. And what are their needs and what can be done and what do they need to look at that. The second part is looking at further sustainability and recovery funding. We know that settings are working with some reduced capacity, but they still need to work in line with the infection control measures and trying to adhere to the integrity of the pod system. So we are getting some proposals from sector representatives. They have done some surveys with the providers, and we're also, as part of the jigsaw, looking at parental surveys, which will assist us in seeing what the needs are and what support is required going forward. In terms of the childcare strategy, yes, we've had an initial meeting already on trying to develop and move forward with the Innovation Lab with our colleagues. There's lots of preparations to be done in advance. But we hope to develop a timeline, sort of a roadmap of when things can happen in November or by November. We are keen to start looking at this again, but it is dependent on how much we're drawn into still dealing with the COVID emergencies and the response, obviously. In Justin's terms, in terms of the closures, figures are going up on a weekly basis. At the minute, we are sitting with about 82%, as Minister had highlighted. The day nurseries are about 93%, day nurseries with school-age childcare is 97%. There is some less with creches that haven't opened fully yet. And what we would say is that childminders, there's about 4% of childminders who are not, their registration is suspended at the minute as well, but it's for other reasons, maternity leaves, etc. So the figures are rising. We have seen, we're monitoring this on a weekly basis, and in the last 2 or 3 weeks it has risen from sort of the high 70%, we're now up to 82%.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Tina, we welcome the work that's being made. Catherine alluded to the all-party group on childcare that you've been engaging proactively with as well, and we appreciate that. Catherine, Robbie, do you want to ask any supplementaries in relation to childcare or even youth services? Maybe Robbie?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tina, for that. That just clarifies from earlier on, and I appreciate you coming back to some of those points. And just one then for Arlene. Arlene, again, I know William had to do this too. He had to declare an interest, and I'd have to declare an interest as a Boys Brigade officer. So we've been lobbied heavily about the guidance and the regulations and so on. But I was just sorry the Minister's not here. There is a helpline available for teachers. Would it be something that maybe you could ask the Minister? Could you guys benefit from that? So for the sector leads might be able, I know you've got a small office which actually functions very highly and you are flat out, so I'm not trying to add to your workload. I'm just wondering, would it be good maybe for you to contact the Minister and ask him, could those guys maybe utilise that service, which is open to teachers at the moment, for that purpose? Quick access advice?
We sought our sectoral colleagues' view on that, and at this moment in time, they don't think that that is something that they require. What they have asked for is a named officer that they can phone on a needs basis for direction. So we have that in place. Every organisation has a named person. In addition to that, we are having weekly meetings ranging from about an hour to 2 hours in the evening with various sectoral groups to problem solve and to build scenarios around and for us to field questions. So when we get to the stage, and if we get to the stage now that we're establishing services on a more regular basis this week on, the arrangement is, Robbie, that if we need that helpline, there will be a dedicated youth service helpline available on the evenings and the weekends for colleagues, but the sector doesn't feel it's required just at this moment in time.
Excellent, Arlene. I'm not surprised that you had an answer for me. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Arlene. Catherine, any supplementaries?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Tina. Just in relation to, again, the community settings, the settings who are a lifeline, I suppose, to the communities that they're in, especially for women to return to work and also to education. They have not received any support as of yet. I'm just wondering that previous to the meeting that Karen and I had with you, if there has been any further developments to that, and also to our request for there to be like a representative for that section of the sector to sit on the reference group.
Yes, Catherine, we envisage that the community creches will be considered as part of any funding and any scheme that we look at from September onwards. We're looking at across all the providers, and yes, we are aware of the community creches who haven't or are not in receipt of any other government funding and the pressures that they will be under. So it is envisaged we will include them in our thinking and our considerations going forward. Yeah, I mean, we will do that. And in terms of the reference group, we do have a representative from NICMA that sit on the group, but yes, the group is co-chaired by myself and Department of Health colleagues, so I have raised the issue with them, and we will consider, yes, you're following our meeting that we had with you and the Minister.
Thanks a million. Thanks a million for that, Tina. I think it'll be a big relief to those 74 settings who have fallen between the cracks up until now.
Yeah, I would just add that we need to look into that, because some of those will already receive other forms of government funding, and of course, as you would expect us to, we just need to be careful about double funding and what other forms, but they will form part of our considerations, the 74, and we will look in depth at those is what I'm saying. So we just need to be careful about other government funding as well that's going to some of those creches.
Okay.
No problem. Thank you, Tina. Thanks Chair.
Thanks very much indeed, officials. I'm grateful for your time this morning, and obviously indeed for the ministers, and continued good wishes with the extremely important work that you're all taking forward on behalf of children and young people across Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Okay, Clark, can I ask you to summarise any actions or requests for additional information resulting from the briefing?
Can I just ask Assembly Broadcasting just to remove the witnesses and add all the members to the spotlight so they can feed back if they hear something they don't like? So I think perhaps, Chairperson, the committee wants to write to the department seeking information on teachers who have tested positive or are self-isolating, including particularly P7 teachers. Also looking for information about pupils who have tested positive or self-isolating, and we'll just get them to come back in writing about how they are recorded on this other code. Perhaps also the committee is wishing to seek clarity on the timeline and advice that will be provided to schools who have elected to not use post-primary transfer testing in the coming year. Additionally then, and with respect to the widening of access to IT support, to ask the department to set out the number of laptops that have been provided and to which schools they have actually gone. Yep. And then in respect of Engage, I think is the committee expressing concerns around the banding and how this is going to lead to some variation in their per pupil funding?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if time allows or not, Clark, but would we possibly get a very short oral briefing on the model that was used to allocate engage funding?
It's on page 100 of your packs. It is pretty simple what they've done.
Okay.
Sorry. That's not what I meant, but it's just, I don't know what they're going to tell us.
Daniel picked out the easiest one to spot, which is when you go from 80, is it 200 to 1,000? So the band was 200 to 1,000, so it's a difference of 800 pupils. And the disparity is up £100 per head, possibly.
On schools with free school meal entitlement below 28%, there's also a band of greater than 500. So that's going to include schools from 500 up to 2,000, approximately. Okay, info's there. Members can review that and ask further questions at future dates if necessary. Thanks, Clark.
Also, just to advise members, I'd sent you a little email a day or two ago to the Education Authority's website, and that shows the allocations that have been made to schools for other things like PPE and cleaning. Not the same as Engage, but just schools have received other monies. And in addition then, following up on Catherine's question, to write to the department about Nurture, asking them to set out the criteria for support for those schools that have received the support or not, and also to clarify around rurality, because that is something that was asked, the committee has asked about previously. And that, members, is all I had. If there's something I've missed or something that is wrong.
Any other actions or requests, members?
Yes.
Chair, can I come up?
Okay, yeah, we'll go Karen and then Justin.
Just on the devices, just if we could, he did say he was going to look at widening out the scope in terms of the criteria. If we could get clarity on that, please, Chair.
Okay. Justin and then Robbie.
Yes, could we write to Derek Baker and thank him for his efforts during his time as Permanent Secretary for the Department of Education and wish him well in the next phase.
Great. Yeah, I suppose point of clarification, he is scheduled to depart but has not yet retired. Is this public information? Yeah,
I'll have a chat. I'll talk to the Dallo and just want to say congratulate someone in the retirement.
We'll double check the best way to extend that sentiment. Justin, appreciate that.
Okay, say agreed.
Okay.
Is that agreed, Chair?
Agreed, members? Yeah, and then I'll bring Robbie in as well. Robbie?
Yep, just on Karen's point about the computers, it's a good one. The scope of it, just to include, if you don't mind, if you can ask, have any teachers had to be able to avail of it, or could they avail of it? Teachers, in terms of, so in terms of this learning and providing the learning online, if they have to isolate, have they access to the appropriate IT to work from home?
So the devices are for pupils.
For pupils at the moment.
Question is what type of devices support is provided to teachers?
Yes, okay. Yep. Self-isolate, lovely stuff. Thanks, members.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other actions or requests, members? No. Okay. Are members agreed on those actions and requests? Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay.
Just the AOB.
Okay, members, AOB. If I could just briefly ask you just to hear me out on the post-primary transfer survey briefly. I reiterate my apologies for being absent this morning due to an unavoidable medical appointment. And the understanding is that the committee is adopting an approach of publishing the survey without an assembly debate on the survey. Can I just check in what way and format and when we would be publishing the survey, Clark?
Well, I had thought to put it onto our website. I would talk to our communications colleagues so they could publish it appropriately. We've had a few people contacting us already who completed the survey and want to know what the results were. So go up on our website, publish it on social media.
Okay. Members, can I
For the clarity, Chair?
Yeah.
It's not that we said we didn't want the motion. What we said was we would publish it and probably support a motion when we get some feedback from it. So it wasn't that we didn't want to have a motion. So what we said was we would publish it, talk about it again, and probably, I would be supportive of a motion at the right time. And I think
that's helpful, Robbie, because my point and my concern would just be that a significant amount of work has gone into the survey. I think there is, it's not a perfect survey. People will have their criticisms, not least due to the speed with which we had to employ it, given that it is focused on this year. But there's a significant amount of work that has gone into that survey that gives rich information, feedback and data. And I would be concerned that if we don't coordinate an assembly debate alongside, shortly after or at the same time as publication of the survey, that you would miss out on an opportunity to have a really open, hopefully informed, balanced debate on the findings in the assembly where the work was done, rather than via just only the media, which is an important place to have a public debate, but it is a different format to what I would imagine it would be a debate in the assembly. Clerk, is there any scope for me to propose that we do seek a drafting of a motion at the very least, or time slots for a motion, even if it's not possible to agree a motion date at this stage?
I think, Chair, the committee has agreed its position and we've moved on. However, if you wish to prevail upon the member of the business committee, if you knew them, to keep a wee slot for us in the coming weeks, because I know in the next couple of weeks there's a lot of budget things which will take a lot of time, and that would push a committee motion way down the list. So maybe if
I see Karen wants to come in as well. Clark, yeah, Karen, yeah. Karen, yeah.
Chair, sorry, you're breaking up really badly there. Couldn't get it all, so apologies. But same as Robbie, I think there was just a wee bit of. I felt a bit miscommunication when you came back into the room. What I had agreed was publishing of the survey followed by the motion, and I believe it needs to be a very strong motion coming from the committee on it. So sort of get the survey out in the public domain for a couple of weeks, but we could have the motion ready to go.
Okay. So that's again helpful clarification. So, can we, Clark, so you haven't agreed. Clark's keeping us stick to the process here. William, do you want to come in briefly before we go back to the clerk here? Yeah.
The person who proposed it, how did the clerk record it?
Chairperson, to clarify, what the committee agreed was to publish the information, which is grand, and then to defer consideration about a motion. So I suggested a motion. It was actually in the in your meeting packs, but you're deferring consideration. So that just means,
can we
if
defer consideration to next week?
Yes.
Didn't specify. Is that a fair way forward at this stage, members, for us to defer consideration of the motion until next week? Yep. Members agree?
Yep.
Okay, that's great. And so when exactly will it be published then, Clark? Next few days, or
next few days. Yeah, because
okay.
Louise knew that, so we were ready to go.
Okay. And will we issue any press release, or just via social media as per the survey itself?
I think it's up to members. We were just going to go. I tend to find press releases end up in the circular file, would be my experience.
I suspect it could be challenging to agree a form of words in a press release as well. So
I do.
We'll go with social media and we'll work on the assembly debate. I genuinely believe that the extent and significance of the work that went into the survey and the extent and significance of the information gathered by the survey seriously merits an assembly debate of the findings of the survey, and I would wish that to be as soon as possible to avoid this being just debated via just media, which is obviously a fully appropriate format to do so, but the work was done in the assembly. It'd be good to have it debated there as well. Okay, members, any other business? Yes, who's that? Go ahead.
I think he's on the phone.
Oh, another phone. Okay. Any other business, members? No. Okay. Thank you, members. The date and time of the next meeting is Wednesday, 14th of October in room 29, Parliament Buildings in Vast Starleaf at 9:30 a.m. The committee meeting does now adjourn.
Push the button there.
Thank you.
Chair. Thank you so much.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room